You took your time, I said. We were prompt, the older man said. Unlike my grandmother, he had the roughness of old age in his voice. Somehow more human than she'd been. But if it helps, we can start the timer from the moment we made eye contact. The brown-haired young man, good-looking enough to be an actor, but for the tiniest scar on his lip, looked at his watch. 29 minutes and 40 seconds left on the clock. For that period of time, you have the benefit of our advice and knowledge, and you can make requests, though we can't promise we'll grant them. If you want, the woman lawyer said, we can cut it short, and save the time for later this month. Once the month is over, we'll be limited to short conversations for each month thereafter. Are you devils? I asked. Demons? The older man chuckled. With the coarser voice, he did sound a little sinister in that moment. Some would say that. What would the rest say? I asked. I looked at Rose, praying for some backup, but she still seemed out of sorts. The remainder would call us practitioners, the woman lawyer told me. Practitioners like you, even. Well, we're a fair bit different from him, the older man said. He arched one thick eyebrow. Question is, does it matter? I glanced at Rose, but she didn't volunteer an argument. I think it does. When I know what you're doing, I can adapt. Why are you here? Your grandmother willed it, the young man said. Why? I asked. The blonde woman responded, because matters were too complex for her to handle on her own, it was an economical route to take, she needed power that she wasn't willing to spare, and we offered. Why? I asked, again. Because we're in the business of dealing with diabolists, the older man said. Why? I asked, once again. There wasn't any sign that I was bothering them with this particular line of questioning. Because we are and were diabolists ourselves, the young man said. Once upon a time. We were offered a contract. Call it bankruptcy. It fits on more than one level. Which brings us to you. How? I asked. We're hoping to include the heir of the Thorburn estate in our number, the old man told me. You want me to work for you? Did my grandmother take the deal? I asked. Madame Thorburn didn't, bless her, the older man said. He smiled, as if he was acknowledging how odd it was for him to say that. She took a harder road. She needed power, as we said. I can't say what for, but I'm sure you could figure it out. I probably could, I said. She needed the power to create my alter ego. To bend the rules enough to let me inherit the estate. The woman leaned forward. More to the point, if she had taken the offer, you wouldn't be here. At least, not in the same capacity. My hand was hurting, the hatchet pulsing cold that was reaching through my clothing. The pain and discomfort might have made my tone a little more pointed than I'd meant it to be. The world would be swallowed up in a sea of hellfire and brimstone. Nothing of the sort. Before our firm existed, it was an otherworldly entity that reached out to our forebears. The deal was simple. Our slates would be cleared, in every respect. We would assume a new role, new names, new responsibilities. Our old lives and every part of those lives would be left behind. Perhaps most importantly, most relevant to this discussion, our debts would be cleared. Karmic debt? Rose asked, suddenly paying attention, jumping into the conversation. Karmic debt, the older man said. Have you done your reading? Rose said, I started, but I was already shaking my head. The old man continued, I'll explain, then, so there are no mistaken assumptions. The world seeks balance in all respects. Whenever a practitioner works, they pay a price. Sometimes the price is overt. A soul for someone's love. An eye for the service of a powerful spirit. The life of a companion to triumph over one's enemies. Sometimes the price is less of a direct transaction. A favor to be paid later. Conversely, an oath given, with nothing expected. Which raises problems, the young man said. The old man met my eyes. What happens when a debt isn't paid? If you take, then die before you can give. Or the inverse. You pass it on to your kids. In some cases, yes. But those children might incur more of a debt. Over time, the debt accumulates. Perhaps 2 generations improve matters, working it off, and then the third undoes their hard work and adds more to the burden. The problem is never resolved. I asked. Until some lawyer practitioners show up and offer a deal, something that wipes all debts clear. That is one option, the woman said. But I wouldn't say the problem is never resolved. The universe writes itself. How? I asked. Why? Was the axe acting up? It was almost as bad as it had been outside, now. The old man answered, the cogs that operate in the background take to grinding you up instead. Funds, treasured belongings, friendships, love, they are all harder to find and easier to lose. Enemies, danger, chaos, and disruption find you more readily. In looser terms, all others, spirits and practitioners get the sense, innate or otherwise, that they can and should work against your interests. Things start to fall apart, and the pieces fall down in the least convenient arrangements for you. The universe, the young man said, conspires against you. Ah, hell, I said. That would explain a few things. The old man continued with the explanation, it would cause as many problems as it solved if the universe did it in an obvious manner. It would raise suspicion and disrupt the smooth operation of things if every coin you flipped turned up with the unwanted side, if every corner held an enemy. The young man said, it's a stopgap measure. Sufficient for the non-practitioners who stumble on ways to give themselves bad karma. But, the old man said, in cases where the debt continues to accumulate, or it reaches a size that one person can't pay off, we sometimes see survivors carry on. Survivors? Rose asked. Some dynasties manage to thrive despite the ill fortunes that are visiting them. There are individuals who are reclusive enough or tenacious enough to carry on. The universe doesn't like to act overtly, so it might give you the coin flip that serves you the least, until you start counting the number of times the coin turns up head versus the times it turns up tails. In any case, the practitioner can live if they're attentive and clever, and the debt can keep growing. This is when we start running into problems. Problems being? I asked. Being the dice all turning up snake eyes, or enemies appearing behind every corner. Once or twice, generally, but that's all things typically need. The universe is elastic. If you push, it bounces back. If you pull, it pulls against you. If you pull too hard, too long, and it snaps, with violent consequence. He seemed content to stop there, letting that sink in. Okay, I said. I might have a general sense of the problem. But what do we do about it? Well, the woman said. She offered me a smile. Option 1 is the simplest, easiest and most obvious. Joining you? I asked. That's option 2. Option 1 is that you die. Violently, she said. The smile didn't even flicker. The elastic snaps, and you too find yourself in an ugly situation. If you're lucky, you can find the time and opportunity to call us, and we'd arrange a prompt solution. I'm not lucky, though, I said. And Molly wasn't lucky either I trailed off. They waited, apparently content to wait while the gears fit together in my head and started turning. I finished my sentence, along a different line. Eats a bit of the karmic backlash, pays a bit of the price for the universe not getting what it was supposed to, and the baton gets passed to me. If I die, the same thing happens. Each of us absorbs a bit of the brunt of it, until one of us finds our footing and carries on. Very likely to be a factor in her reasoning, the young male lawyer said. She was clever. But the danger in this plan is that the backlash you face could wipe out your family altogether. It would be more a backup or a side benefit than a true plan. And, Rose said, like you said before, there's no way she would spend that much power to put me here for that. Right, I said. Karma has very little to do with good and evil, the blonde woman said. It has a great deal to do with right and wrong. Can you have a surplus? I asked. You can. It's equally problematic, in many ways, the woman said. Such individuals have good fortune, find life conspires to do them well, all leading up to a moment where an opportunistic other manages to work around this good fortune and brings about their downfall. Okay, I said, thinking. And if it has to do with right and wrong, then can you get bad mojo for, say, going after a local practitioner's livelihood? How? The young man asked. I started to reach for the note, then realized I couldn't without moving the hatchet. I did it awkwardly with my other hand, handing it to them. While he read, the woman asked, has he acted against you? Done unprovoked harm to you? Directly? No. Indirectly? He tricked me and left me for the monsters to eat. We'd only just met. Unless the whole history of my family counts as a provocation. You'd be secure. It would even benefit you. You should be able to find all of this information in the textbooks of the library. I looked, I said. We looked. There was nothing about what justifies an execution. Executions are a formalization of what we just talked about. You'll find more on them in books relating to karmic debt and the manipulation thereof. I groaned a bit. Looking in the wrong place. Damn it, I heard Rose muttering. You offend the community, the community retaliates, and the balance is maintained. If the community acts against you and it's unjust, then there is imbalance, and this weighs heavier than matters between individuals. Clever individuals with some knowledge on how to use and manipulate karma could theoretically survive and ride the backlash to a position at the top. I rubbed my chin. And if I contrive to get them to punish me for a crime I didn't commit? Get an order of execution against myself? Blake. Rose said. Theoretically, I said. There are any number of factors to consider, the older man said. If they offer you a chance to speak for yourself and you don't, they would face little backlash. Are they brash? Too stupid to do so? I didn't even have to think about it. The way they'd shut down my attempt to divide them was still fresh in my memory from last night. No. There is also the matter of the debt weighing on you, he said. Nearly 7 lifetimes worth of unpaid karmic balance. You could work hard your entire life and only make up one of those. Devote yourself wholly and singularly to that one task, and you could maybe make up a second lifetime's worth. Reality is not of a mind to assist you in ascending to greatness. Far easier to help the execution along and take what it can from the aftermath. The universe sounds a bit like some kind of asshole loan shark, I said. Make of it what you will, he said. The hatchet wasn't as cold as it had been, but with the chill it emanated, my hand couldn't warm up. I was distracted by the pain, stumbling as I tried to find what I was trying to say, and I haven't read anything explicit about the reason this is all secret. There are rules others follow, with stiff penalties, and they generally keep to hunting what they're allowed to hunt, but what's to keep me from appearing on TV tomorrow and showing off my magic? Responsibility, the old man said. It started as an ethic. You don't initiate someone into this world without teaching them the proper way things are done. That ethic became a rule, and the rule became a part of the fabric of things. If you introduce someone to all of this and they make a mistake, then some of that karma weighs on you. I nodded slowly. These are the sorts of things Rose should have taught you. Any more questions? I've probably spent way too long asking about stuff I could read in books, I said. But this is useful grounding to have. And we probably wouldn't have gotten around to those books for another few weeks, Rose said. Right. But I should to ask about other stuff. I'll start with an obvious one. Can I trust you guys? No, the woman lawyer said. But you can trust that we won't sabotage you. Our interest is in bringing more people under our wing. We can achieve that by offering you good service. And by helping maneuver me into a corner, I said. So I end up saying your names 3 times and using the escape clause. We could use those tactics, she said. For the time being, we won't. That's vague, I said. Then I'll be specific. We'll tell you before we maneuver you into a corner. Explicitly? Rose asked. Beg pardon, the woman lawyer asked. Tell us explicitly, please. If you wish. I or one of my partners will look one of you in the eyes and inform you exactly what we're doing, when it comes up. Why do you want me? We don't. Quite frankly, you're useless to us at this point, the young man said. But things do change. And the cost is a few thousand years of servitude? To clear my entire family's debt. That is part of the cost, he said. Any true mark you made on the world is painted over. If you want to rise in the ranks and become partner, you'll need to give up your name, possibly aspects of your identity. Easier than it sounds, after a few decades or centuries of long days, your past life well behind you. I see, I said. Any other questions? The old man asked. Something was bothering me. I had doubts, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Okay, I had a lot of doubts, but there was one that seemed fresher in my mind, elusive. The money? Rose asked. Our allowance. If I may suggest we deduct the necessary expenses for the upkeep of the property, the young lawyer asked. No trick? Rose asked. If it's not a trap, then yes. No, he said. No trick. He pulled 2 envelopes from his suit pocket, checked them, and then tossed one onto the table. Okay, that was handled. Good. I picked up the envelope and pocketed it. Important point number 2. Going outside, Rose said. How do we do it? Know how to defend yourself, the old man said. If you wish, we can arrange for an errand boy to handle groceries and purchases. You'd be limited to the house all the same. Rose glanced at me. She still looked out of sorts, but she was thinking now. Which was good, because I was preoccupied. I nodded absently. I couldn't quite figure out what had bothered me. Something elusive one of them had just said. Yes, she said. Then we'll take out the cost for the errand boy from next month's allowance, the young lawyer said. If that's all right. Yes, Rose said. If it isn't a trap or a trick. We'll see to it. And the question of marriage, in the instructions? Rose asked. That got my full attention. I'd nearly forgotten. What of it? The lawyer asked. Blake has to marry a man. Rose asked. Mr. Thorburn has to do no such thing, the older man said. It has been left up to our discretion, to evaluate Mr. Thorburn's progress and evaluate him regularly, keeping the intentions of the departed Mrs. Thorburn in mind all the while. That seems too easy, I said. It isn't easy at all, he replied, rest assured. I do recommend you marry, and I'd even recommend you marry a man, because fulfilling an obligation is an advantage that can help you survive. Still, I can't imagine it's at the forefront of your mind right now. I shook my head. Then we can leave it for another meeting at another time. Speaking of. 14 minutes remain, the younger lawyer said. 2 more questions, I said. Then I think we're done, unless Rose has something to say. You said the cost of working for your firm a few hundred to a few tens of thousands of years of service. A loss of identity, a loss of a name. If you rise through the ranks, you might even take the name of Mann, Lewis or Levin, the young man said. Distracting me. And what happens to you? Rose asked. I bit my tongue before I snapped at her. She was interrupting my line of questioning. We're done, the young lawyer said. Early. Not easy, I assure you, but it's an option. Which is why you want to recruit, she said. A part of it, he said. But there's something else, isn't there? I asked, before I could get interrupted again. Hundreds or thousands of years of employment, a loss of identity, a loss of our name. But you didn't say that's everything. No. We didn't, the blonde lawyer said. What's the catch? I asked. She frowned. In the process of signing the contract, you agree to give them a foothold. Them? Rose asked. Them. You should know who I mean. You hand over things of value, and they take them. Footholds. To help them climb forth from where they've been banished or bound, or give them a foundation to better leverage their strength. A room, a house, a pen, a sword, a companion. A pair of shears. I could go into detail about the benefits, the why of it, but I would be frittering away your time. There is more on the subject in the library. I think I get it, even without the books, Rose said. Quiet. We make that deal, to save our hide, and they get stronger, making life harder on the rest of humanity. Theoretically, I asked, what would happen if I swore, right here and right now, that I was never going to take the deal? We would conduct business as the contract with Rose D. Thorburn mandates, the older lawyer said, but you would find that we, like the universe, had far less goodwill towards you. I nodded. She shifted position. Her tone somewhat softer than it had been, she said, I can't speak for the others, but I would respect you for it, I would understand. In the end, however, business is business, and we have our obligations. Sure, I said. Is there more you would like to ask along those lines? She asked. I shook my head. No. But I'd like to ask if you could deliver this letter. Unless there's a flaw in this plan I'm overlooking. There are complications, the young lawyer said, but there will be complications with any route you take. If you were to take it yourself, the woman lawyer said, or have a more direct hand in it, you reap a greater reward. Personally restoring balance to the grand scheme of things I can't help but feel like this is dangerous. Karmic retribution. Promoting eye for an eye thinking. How do you know if things are balanced? You pay attention, the old man said. Right, I said. I frowned. To have the lawyers deliver the letter or go myself? I think I might have to ask you to deliver the letter, I said. I couldn't ignore the hatchet, or my hand. I've got something else to take care of. If I may suggest a compromise, the young woman said. I've been working for several days, and I'm due a break. I could spare an hour, if you can see to that something else and find time for the errand. The escort didn't work out so hot for us the first time, Rose murmured. I could see from movement of the lawyer's eyes that she'd heard, but the woman gave no other sign. I shook my head a little. It's dash. The object under your coat demands your attention. May I? I withdrew the hatchet, but I didn't hand it over. I'll help, she said. No trickery or sabotage. I can guarantee you'll be better off than if you saw to it yourself. You'll see us safely the entire way there and back. I asked. And while we're there? As safely as you allow, the lawyer said. Rose chimed in. You promise not to carry out any tricks or traps at least until the next time we meet? Yes, she said. This won't count against our time? I asked. No cost, insofar as something can have no cost. The other lawyers were standing. The younger one looked at his watch. Then we're done, with just over 10 minutes remaining on the clock. Thank you for the hospitality. You're welcome, I said, feeling wary. The older lawyer extended a hand. I hesitated, then shook it with my numb hand. He didn't react. I nodded. We'll see you later in the day, Ms. Lewis, he said. You will, the blonde lawyer said. I'd expected the two men to disappear, but they left through the front door, collecting outdoor jackets along the way and pulling them on as they made their way down the front steps. Leaving me in the company of Ms. Lewis. May I see it? She asked. The imbued object. I promised it I'd keep it warm, I said. Not exactly true, is that? She asked me. I frowned. I'm fairly well versed in seeing the nuances of karma at work. You've come very close to lying a few times in a short span of time, and you've each outright lied at least once in the half-hour prior to our arrival. Oh hell, I said. It's easy to slip, at first, she said. In this case, you're bordering on a lie, but you're still telling the truth. Rose here promised you'd keep it warm. Your promise was implicit, and because Rose is an extension of you. It's borderline, I said. Being more honest means you stock up more goodwill with the universe and any others you meet. Borderline dishonesty is useful, lying by omission is better yet, and unvarnished honesty is better still. I can't quite interpret it, but perhaps you were joking. Sarcasm. I thought back. Shit, I said. So what? I lose my power. You lose some. And a mere ghost gains more influence over you, even through a circle, or when bound into an object. It'll take at least a week to wear off. Luckily, there aren't many things in this house to hear, And me? Rose asked. It matters for you too, Ms. Lewis said. For the time being, you are connected to Blake. Tell me, Blake, did you feel weaker? More vulnerable? I felt tired, I said. I wondered for a moment if Rose had done something. A vestige is fragile. Defy the natural order, and the vestige suffers. And a damaged vestige drains energy, I said, glancing at Rose. Just so. I'd kind of expected a clap of thunder. I said. Barring the exceptional moments of idiocy, such as the breaking of an oath, you typically only discover what you've done when you reach for power and find it gone. So stupid of us, Rose said. Ms. Lewis smiled and shook her head. I will keep the ghost contained. To do otherwise would put a client at risk. May I? She extended a hand. I handed the hatchet over. She didn't flinch as the handle touched her hand. You've worked with tools before, she said. Your hands have that look about them, and you handed the hatchet to me handle first. It's the sort of thing you learn on the job, or you're taught it as a matter of course, becoming a gentleman. Blake, not a gentleman? Rose asked. That is the sort of sarcasm you can get away with, Ms. Lewis said. A gentleman would have offered guests something to drink. As would a lady, Miss Thorburn. Shall we go see to your errands? I can attend to this tool in the meantime. A little unsure, I still nodded. She'd left a winter coat folded over a chair in the front hallway. She draped it over her shoulders without putting her arms through the sleeves. I, for my part, did what I could to warm my hands by rubbing them against one another, before we stepped outside. Ground rules, Ms. Lewis said. This isn't business. Anything I say or do should be taken in the capacity of an acquaintance or teacher. I won't give you answers I think you should pay for. I understand, I said. Good response, she said. Not committing to anything. All that said, I'd like to help you if I see the chance. Somehow I anticipated you guys would be scarier, I said. Or, and I hope I'm not being offensive, more professional. We adapt to the client, she said. She didn't flinch at the cold as we made our way down the driveway. Something a little more other about her, like the old man's laugh. You're being awfully helpful, running this errand with me for no benefit. Or is there something I'm missing? Let's just say it's me establishing a relationship with a potential new client. We can say that, Rose said, speaking from the mirror I wore in the open V of my jacket collar, but what is it really? It's largely selfish, Ms. Lewis said. She drew in a deep breath, then sighed. As clients go, you're quite endearing, compared to our usual. She withdrew a spool from an inside pocket of her jacket. Thin silver wire. And this is not something I usually get to do, in the course of my duties. Nostalgic. Ms. Lewis unwound the wire, then began winding it loosely around the foam handle as she walked. "Who are your regular clients?" Rose asked. "They vary, and they are confidential," Ms. Lewis said. "Speaking in general terms, a rare few are like your grandmother. A great many aren't." "And what are they like?" I asked. "You've met the barber. They are the sorts who would use him and sleep that night." "Ah," I said. "You're using your sight to see the connection between me and it?" "Yes. I would recommend using it more. Try it now." I switched to my sight. The connections weren't very clear. "Look to your 3 o'clock without turning your head," she said. I did. Something that might have been a raccoon scampered down from the top of the garage to the far side. It probably wasn't a raccoon. "It's gone," I said. "It's there, it's just out of sight. Keep looking." I did. I searched for the connection, but I couldn't make out much. The world was buried under a haze, and the wind was blowing in too many directions at once. Trace your eyes along the paths that things run in parallel, the straightest lines. Good place to start, and good places to avoid if you think someone's searching for you. I looked harder. The saturation and contrast seemed exaggerated, the world painted in an impasto style with coarse brush strokes, animated with life and constant motion. I followed the areas where the strokes and lines met, so I could see the flow of it, not stopping at a dead end but naturally sweeping my eyes along the straighter paths where the particles danced. I caught it a second or two faster than I might have if I wasn't already focused on the area. It looked like the slop that you dug out of a gutter after a rain. Leaves, branches, twigs, and a bit or two of trash. There were only shadows where eyes were supposed to be, and a few pieces of stone, some teeth, and a bird's beak where it was supposed to have teeth. It stopped in its tracks, seemingly startled, as if my vision had transfixed it. A moment later, it bolted, disappearing around the corner at edge of Hill's Glade house. "You looked too hard," she said. "You made a connection, and it noticed. A lesser elemental. Now keep looking. Softer. Relax, and try to see where the longest lines are. If you don't focus too hard, it's easier to see them." I looked, relaxing my focus on the spirits. It very deliberately avoided the railing of the fence as it perched on the stone of the wall, glancing my way. It seemed bothered that I'd spotted it again. Leaves and twigs stood up like an irritated cat or a dog with the hackles up. My eye traveled over the splash of minor spirits that danced around it, seeking out the areas where they were traveling in the straightest lines. One, blocked by the house. I eyeballed it, figured out the direction, found it on the other side of the house, faint, disappearing into the woods and glades. The Briar girl, I thought. The others I'd seen before June showed up. I suspected they were hers. She wants your attention, and very possibly wants your help. You know her? I asked, looking at Ms. Lewis. No. But I can tell. What does she want? The woods and marshes. She can't have the woods and marshes, Mr. Thorburn. She'll be upset when you tell her. Probably, I said. She took a moment to wind the wire around, hooking it through one loop, then adjusting the tightness of each segment in turn. It was biting into the foam grip, but not so much it was ugly or unnatural. The end result was more like something between a Celtic knot and a chain-link fence. You'll have some confrontation soon. You'll need to be stronger. I know, I said. Are you aware enough to know you're in danger right now? I raised an eyebrow. How? Who? Rose asked. A car, behind us. Ignore it. We'll take an alley the car can't pass through, forcing them to circle around. We can stop partway, forcing them to turn around again or stop and wait for us to emerge. We'll decide what we do then. This is more passive than I expected of you, I said. I have my hands full, for one thing, Ms. Lewis said. And there are other reasons. Consider this a lesson. The first step is getting a bead on them. As we turn to enter the alley, you'll have a glimpse of them. Look for the connection and hold on to it. Fixate on it without identifying yourself. Sure, I said. You make it sound so easy. It's moving. A straight line. It's also isolated. There are few cars on the road. It's too early in the morning, and the city sees little traffic. It's easier to spot a car alone than a car in the crowd, with your sight just as much as with your eyes. Right. Holding on is going to be harder than finding it. Now. We turned. The car passed behind me. I had only a glimpse of the electric blue sedan. Stuffed animals on the ledge by the rear-view window. Sure enough, I found the connection. Thin. Holding on, I wasn't even sure how. I focused my attention on it. It's turning and turning again, going around the block, she said. We stop? I asked. Ms. Lewis nodded. We stopped in the middle of the alleyway. I could see as the car slowed, then stopped. The connection became far less focused. Diffuse on one end, tighter on the other. There are options, now, Ms. Lewis said. The first step would be identifying them. I'm not going to give you the answer. Find it yourself. I had only the clues to go by, the color and make of the car, the fact that it had been a bit dingy. Not new by any stretch of the imagination, the stuffed animals. The wrong track. Not enough to put any name to it. The connection itself, I examined it in more detail, as the end closest to me got more and more broken up. If I had a better eye for this sort of thing, I might have been able to see where they were focusing their attention. That would be a useful tool. To know where your enemy's senses were directed and to act elsewhere. I wondered if the others I'd seen darting out of sight of people had been doing the same. The spirits that made up the connection took all sorts of shapes. I couldn't focus enough to make them out. They seemed to dart out of my view when I tried to look at them, like the dust that settled on the surface of the eye. I'm not sure I can, I said. You would have more focus if you hadn't lied, she said. Be glad you were in the house and it wasn't more severe. Try harder. I tried. Interpreting what the spirits were supposed to be was hard. They often had arms and legs, sometimes in vague human shapes, sometimes not, and most were transparent. The shape, the colors, the aesthetics, they all pointed to the ideas and elements these things supported. I couldn't decipher them before I felt something shift. The connection solidified on the one end. In a heartbeat, they had both focused on me. Yet they hadn't moved. A second later, they were taking some sort of action, moving, and very deliberately, they scattered my perception of where they were. Disappearing somewhere. I could tell they had a bead on me, but I had no idea where they were. They had deftly flipped the tables on me. Duchamps, I said. Ms. Lewis nodded. Her attention was on the hatchet, as she scratched at the metal with what looked like a needle. Details? Enchantresses, I said. A coven. One of them is calling family, she said. She hasn't gotten through, probably because it's so early in the day. But she's using an implement to focus the connection. She will get through, given another minute or two, and you'll have more enemies to deal with. Very possibly the entire coven. This is the point where the whole escorting us safely there thing comes into play. It is, she said. She kept scratching at the hatchet. When she saw me looking, she said, "Oh. This will be another minute. You're not going to fight them? Or stop the call?" "No. I'm not permitted." "I what?" "I can only make explicit use of my power while I'm working. As I said before, I'm nothing more than a teacher and an acquaintance while I'm taking this break." "You misled us," Rose said. "I was very clear. Don't start crying now. We've made it this far. Now face them head on. Can you see it? One coming right now." I looked, and I saw something. A bird made its way into the alley. Not a hawk or anything like that, but one of the tiny ones that tended to bob up and down in the air more than it actually glided or flew. A chickadee or sparrow or some such. It unfolded, feathers sweeping across a space 5 feet long, a momentary curtain. Putting me face to face with a woman so beautiful she looked artificial. Her ears had a slight point to them, and she had an eerie sort of confidence to her step. Snow settled on platinum-colored hair and bare shoulders, exposed by clothing that seemed more ornamental than anything else. Something between a revealing variant on a Japanese yukata and a high-fashion dress I might expect to see on a runway in France or Italy, inspired by a flower in bloom. Any time I thought it might belong to one culture, some aspect of it dismissed the notion. Her eyes were pale from corner to corner, the eyelashes long and dark in a way a makeup artist would struggle to achieve. When she smiled, she showed a bit of her teeth. She drew a sword slowly, with second after second of the clean sound of the weapon leaving the scabbard. I wasn't sure what kind of sword it was. The damned weapon was easily 12 feet long. Her arms outstretched in front and behind her, she bent the metal until it bowed in a hue. When it came free, it did so in a shower of sparks, the blade practically dancing as it recoiled, returning to its straight length. The sound of metal singing filled the air. She held it pointing straight up until it stilled, then lowered it so the point was aimed straight at my heart, her position very much like a fencer's. If I looked past the movement of the wind that made the length of thin metal sway, the blade didn't shake or waver in the slightest. Ms. Lewis placed a hand on my shoulder, making me jump a little. When she spoke, it was a murmur in my ear. Now, shoulders square, chin up. Take a deep breath. Get some oxygen to that brain of yours. Why are you saying that? I asked. I'm going to walk you through this, and I'm going to hope that you follow my instructions to the letter. Now pay attention. The less guidance you demand from me, the faster I can hand this hatchet to you. The swordswoman wasted no time, stepping forward. Barefoot on snow-crusted pavement. I backed away. To do otherwise would mean standing still while the point of that giant sword would simply slide into my heart. Ms. Lewis, however, stepped into the space I had just vacated. She put her hand out, and as the blade approached her chest, she pushed it to one side. I'm supposing your master told you to kill or harm him, Ms. Lewis said. What of it? The swordswoman asked. She had a strange accent. Less like a person who had grown up fluent in one language and was carrying things over into the next, and more like a French, Russian, and one or two other accents were all layered onto one another, compounding each other. You shouldn't harm me without her orders, Ms. Lewis said. The other narrowed her eyes. I can do as I please. Go ask, Ms. Lewis said. Ask your master who I am, and whether you should carry through. The other didn't budge. Instead, she made a face, and then quickly came to a decision. She drew her hand back, ready to plunge the weapon through Ms. Lewis' chest. Ms. Lewis didn't move. The other sniffed and transformed, wings unfolding and enclosing her in the span of a second. She disappeared down the far end of the alley. Familiars can't go outside their master's orders. I asked. Master feels young, Ms. Lewis said, taking hold of my arm. She led me in the opposite direction the other had gone. No older than 13. You generally don't get inducted into this world until you're about that age, these days. It means the familiar is new. So you misled it. Yes and no. It shouldn't attack me, but that's independent of everything else. Can you open locks? Not a trick I know, I said. She drew a small notebook from her pocket. She drew out an image. An hourglass shape with a circle in the middle. She drew a small pad of sticky notes from another inside pocket. Draw something like this, put it on the doorknob, and empower it. I did. I copied it out, stuck it against the doorknob, and then stabbed the back of my hand with the pen. Still, I used the blood that welled around the injury site and smeared it across the image. You need a power source, Ms. Lewis said. Blood won't do for the long term. I know, I said. The knob was rattling, internal mechanisms moving with excruciating slowness. I'd hoped for something quicker and more effective. You're weak, and that is going to hold us back, Blake Thorburn, Ms. Lewis told me. Tell me, can you identify the other we just saw? Name it? No. Stick a label on it? I could maybe say it's a fairy, but that's only a guess. It's an accurate guess. My grandmother didn't like putting labels on others, or so she wrote. She wrote it was dangerous to do it, because they could lie or blur the lines, and making assumptions could get you killed. Very true. In this case, I think it's a safe assumption. You've read Essentials, I assume. Standard reading for most new practitioners. I have, I said. Then you know what fairy are weak against. I thought, but I couldn't connect it. Something about raw iron, but crude elements, Rose cut in. Things that have been worked, refined, or crafted are less effective against them. Which puts us in an awkward position, Ms. Lewis said. She was leaning against the wall by the door, scratching symbols into the metal with the needle. In a city, they thrive, because just about everything is worked and refined. They find us interesting, and ennui is to them what death is to us. I was busy scribbling down another symbol. I looked up to ask, is that something we can use? The doorknob clicked. Ms. Lewis opened the door, leading the way inside. When we were inside, I removed the paper from the one side, closed the door, locked it, and then stuck the other sticky note to the inside. Again, I smeared it with a thumbprint of blood. Protection? Ms. Lewis asked. I figured it might help, I said. It might, Ms. Lewis said. This way. We made our way down the hallway. It was a residential building. Maybe in bottom-of-the-barrel old folks' home, judging by the smell. Sorry, but I gotta ask, is it really going to help? Rose asked. He doesn't have much power. It might have been more useful to spend the time running. Probably, Ms. Lewis said. It also expended power. A small drop of blood, but there's a larger share of personal power invested in that than you might think. Doing that too often is dangerous. I felt a sting of annoyance. Then tell me that. It doesn't really matter, and I want you to be confident more than I want you to be entirely accurate and efficient in what you're doing. You'll be safer if you familiarize yourself with the tools at your disposal and act with conviction. Okay, Rose said. I want you to tell me if I do something wrong, I said. Please. Then I'll tell you we should be talking strategies and tricks. The first, have you learned to strengthen and break connections? Yes, Rose said. Some of it. We did it to lure in the ghost. And breaking connections? Ms. Lewis asked. Case in point, they're tracking your every step. They were. I could feel their eyes on the back of my head. The connections were there, too, fuzzy on one end, to the point that I couldn't trace it back to them, but unerringly focused on me. The other was making its way back to the alley, meandering. No doubt looking for a trace of us. No, I don't know how to break connections, I said. Clench and unclench your injured hand. Get the blood flowing from the wound. Now, instead of supplying power to the conduit, you want to block it. If I'd had to draw a line parallel to the connection I was feeding, then to block it. I draw the line sideways. Perpendicular. Think of it as a wall or a dam to block or divert the river. I stopped, ready to bend down and draw the line. But Ms. Lewis took my arm, pulling me along and keeping me moving. What? I asked. Wait one moment. This is about symbolism and effect. A great deal of what any practitioner does is draw on the power of others. Connections, pacts, bonds, borrowed power. You can be dull and methodical about it, but that's only going to impress a specific kind of other. If you use presentation, however, timing, flair, showmanship, it matters. You do have an audience, after all. It's marginal as benefits go, but if I'm going to teach you, I'm going to teach you to do it right. Gesture and statement can go along with power. Saying the right thing, doing the right thing, they can add a modicum of power to anything you do, for very little cost. Understand? I think so, I said. Draw the line of blood a moment before we round the corner. Take the stairwell, downstairs. There was a bang on the door, loud enough to carry down the hallway. We're on the ground floor, I said. I'm aware. Not if this works. And if it doesn't? Then I'll find another way to keep you safe as I promised. Now. There was a bang on the door, and the sword speared through the wood. It cut down in one swift stroke, severing the top 3/4 of the door from the lower hinge. I bent down, using the blob of blood on the back of my hand as a palette, to draw one thick smear of blood across the top of the stairs, between us, the other, and where the 2 Duchamps were. In that same movement, as I drew my arm left to right, I took a step down to the right, heading down the stairs. Good, Ms. Lewis said. Everything you do has meaning, and informs your practice. Getting further away hurt the connection, as did rounding the corner. Evasive actions. Was it confusing the spirits, and thus making us harder to track, or was it the other way around, with the spirits recognizing that we were trying to slip away and acting in accord with it? Whatever the case was, the effect was pronounced. I didn't feel their eyes on me anymore. I heard the door coming to pieces in the hallway above us, as we quickly and quietly descended the flight of stairs. I stopped at the foot of the stairs, reached into my back pocket, and withdrew one of the small bike mirrors. I propped it up in the corner. Keep an eye on things. Porrick could reach through to get me, Rose whispered. I don't think a hand is going to reach through there, I said. The sword could. I heard a faint scrape. Was the sword dragging along the floor? I hurried down the hall to catch up to Ms. Lewis. No obligation, Rose, I said. But it'd be handy. Rose said, I'll keep an eye out. I can pop in and look, then come back. I nodded, realized she couldn't see me from her angle, and said, thanks. To Ms. Lewis, I asked, what are we doing down here? Ms. Lewis said, for now, I'm hoping you're learning. Now, fairy often use glamour, Ms. Lewis said. Do you know what that is? Like mirages, I said. Things that aren't really there. We passed a room filled with large, bulky equipment. Vacuums, a pressure washer, steam cleaner. You're wrong, she said. The things they conjure up are there. They're fabricated, and it's this affinity for things that have been crafted that helps the fairy avoid being touched so easily by fabricated things. With glamour, the fairy might create an image of a flower. It's an image. But as they put power into it, it gains substance. As people see it and recognize it, they feed power into it. Plant that flower in a garden, leave it be, and it will grow as any flower might. It becomes a part of the garden, and the garden adapts. It adapts to the viewers, becoming what they want and expect to see. A two-way street. Given opportunity, it becomes as much of a part of things as if it was always there. Could you dash? Rose started. She stopped as we did. Ms. Lewis had peered into a room and stopped in her tracks. Could you do something like that to fuel a vestige? To make the false copy more real? Ms. Lewis smiled a little. Theoretically. But there is a fragility to it. An idea is an idea, after all, and if you dismiss it or if you challenge the lie and win, then it is liable to fall apart. This is in addition to the fragility a vestige already has. I can say with conviction that this would do you more harm than good. Oh, Rose said. A little disheartened. Ms. Lewis didn't hold back. Glamour thrives on attention, on interacting with our senses and being validated. A vestige is like gossamer, and any interaction does damage to it. It's a contradiction, and that makes for an exceedingly dangerous balance to strike. Damage one element and it all might collapse. We had stopped at one doorway. Ms. Lewis led the way inside. It was a workshop, complete with a massive box of breakers, tools hanging on the wall, water heaters, and an old trash can filled with bits of concrete and plumbing. I bent down and drew out a line of blood to break the connection again. Their focus wasn't anywhere near us, at this point. Ms. Lewis continued. A glamour is most effective if it can insinuate itself into your subconscious. The fairy manipulate things to distract, to addle your senses so you aren't paying attention to the fact that it doesn't fit with reality. You're more afraid for your life than you are concerned with the ridiculous length of her blade, and the fact that she couldn't possibly be strong enough to hold it. You challenged her. As your partner Rose already said, they're weak against the unrefined, against crude things. That includes attitudes. Their court is one of dancing around subjects, illusions, games, masquerades, and complex plots that unfold over decades and centuries. They shore themselves and their reality up with glamour, and they use these illusions made reality to fool even themselves. It catches them off guard when you are blunt. It offends them on a fundamental level, because they thrive off of belief, real or otherwise, and they don't like for those beliefs to be challenged. And this one? I asked. Any clues on what she's about? The swordswoman. The fairy go through trends, fashions of a sort. Mixing notions, styles, and past ideas into new forms until they've run completely out of ideas. Then they rebel, they overthrow the court, and a new season begins with a different foundation. Light fairy versus the dark, for example, or a court with a true king and queen and a dynasty that they've glamored up to extend back through the centuries. The duelist would be one idea that might have caught their fancy, as of late. I'm not sure I get it, I said. They're just playing. Ms. Lewis used the tools to finish the hatchet. It's a very serious sort of play, when you get down to it. Dress it up in the glamour of possible true death, using a rapier can kill even fairy. Build up stories of an unbeatable duelist, fights for pride, fights for the idea of romance. See what ideas and adventures emerge. Something as brutal, violent and sudden as this is far more dramatic and interesting when the death of one individual in a duel might throw 200 plots into disarray. A fairy cannot afford not to watch. She's dangerous, then, I said. My eyes roved over the tools. Anything I could use? Crude, unrefined. She's dangerous, though I should stress that she's here. She wasn't so good she could become part of the story they were telling in the court. It's very possible she lost an important fight and walked away. Or she broke a rule for this particular set of games and was exiled for her trouble. It is very telling when a fairy becomes a familiar. Going out of her way to experience mortality, to form a bond with a person for decades, doesn't it seem like a desperate grasp at occupying herself or filling her time? She's staving off boredom? I asked. She's most likely clinging to the last few scraps available to her. It's hard to say where this leads. Some lose their minds, others throw away their minds, carving away their personalities and memories so they might start fresh. Some defy the court and try to change the game in another way, trying to bring about a larger change, and they get banished when they fail. The question is, why is this information important to you? I don't know, I said. That was an awfully fast answer, she said. Sounding a touch annoyed. She handed me the hatchet, handle first. I explained a great deal. Surely one of you two can pull something out of it. The pattern of the silver wire continued on with the pattern scratched into the metal. Faint, but noticeable where the light caught the rough patches versus the smooth patches. The silver wire in the grip didn't dig into my hand. It wasn't nearly so cold as it had been. She's trapped, Rose said. At the end of her rope. It's a weak point. You're thinking along the right lines. Beg pardon, but Mr. Thorburn, I recommend you keep your third eye open. Train that sense of yours. They're still looking for us. They were. This wasn't a hiding place. I reached for a connection. I couldn't feel much at all. Not feeling it. Might be that she's gone, or I'm not doing fantastic, or my power's weaker than it was. Rose? I'll check, Rose said. I thought maybe I could feel her absence. Another connection. That was useful, in a way. I could feel some connection to the fairy. I went out of my way to avoid feeding it in any way, lest I strengthen the bond. I'd seen with the ghost June, that sympathy, saying the wrong thing, or anything of the sort could strengthen the connection in the smallest ways. Why did we come down here? I asked. You haven't really explained. We've cornered ourselves. Isolated places are almost always better for a practitioner. Places where people don't tread, where delicate things like ghosts and vestiges aren't torn apart by passing people and their perceptions, and where you can bend rules and there are less people to see and challenge it. But we've cornered ourselves, I said, repeating myself for emphasis. If it comes down to it, I will give you a name, and you can call it. A name that I wouldn't regret calling? I asked. I would take on the cost, she said. I swore to keep you as safe as you allow me to. Subjective as safe might be, I would take the cost. And would this thing I called then go on a rampage, murdering people or setting Jacob's bell on fire? Some could, if you were of a mood for that sort of thing, she said. Right, I said. As if to echo my thought, Rose reappeared, saying, the fairy just started coming down the stairs. Our next few actions will need to be decisive, Ms. Lewis said. I've told you what you need to know, I can answer questions. Have I taught you how to fish, or do you need me to give you a fish? I kind of wouldn't mind just getting the answer, Rose said. It would be more accurate to say I gave you the answer, and I'm waiting to see if you need me to walk you through it as well. You gave us the clue. I asked. I gave you several. It's up to you to decide what to do. Or ask me for help. Get in the habit of thinking out loud. She's fairy, she's weak to crude things, I said. I was aware that talking about her was increasing the strength of the connection, but she was going to find us down here anyways. To keep the ideas flowing, I threw out another comment, she's all dressed up in illusions. Or illusions made real, anyways. She's arrogant, dressed up like a duelist Rose said, as if my ideas had spurred her own. And she failed, I added. She hooked up with this kid in a familiar deal to stave off boredom. She's been cooped up in this bird form, and I doubt there's a lot of opportunity to do her thing. She'll be eager. Rushed. Impatient. She wants drama, and this is probably her best chance she's had at it since she agreed to become a familiar. Can you capitalize on it? Ms. Lewis asked. Or leverage it? We could challenge her to a duel, Rose said. I could see Ms. Lewis' eyebrows raise a fraction at that. You mean you want me to duel her, I said. She's going to try and kill you anyways. Might as well set some ground rules. I could hear the scrape of the sword against the floor. When I spoke, I whispered, why? Rose hissed her words, it's an idea. I don't know why. She's proud, she wants something interesting. Let's give it to her and see what you get. We had only seconds left. My eyes looked over the room. The tools. No. I was looking in the wrong place. The tools were things that had been made. I looked to the trash can. Filled with debris and broken things, yet to be hauled away and thrown out. I started to reach into it, and saw how my hand was caked in the blood that had welled out from the wound. Probably giving myself tetanus. I reached inside, tried to find something, and came up with a handful of bent, rusty nails, rocks and splinters. I kicked it over. I made my way over the stuff I'd scattered along the floor, checking each thing I was stepping over while making sure I didn't step onto a nail or a piece of metal that might pierce my boot. I kicked some stuff out into the hall. Two gross-looking pipes of different lengths, a pile of rust-caked nails, bits of crushed concrete and a shaft of rotted wood. Hatchet in hand, I stepped into the hallway. The other had stopped at the sound of the impact. A short distance up the hallway. Found you, the fairy said. She held her sword so it dragged behind her. Slippery prey. Hiding from prying eyes. Ms. Lewis stepped into the hallway as well. She stepped around me, stopping just behind my shoulder. 3 to kill, the fairy said. She smiled, and the smile touched her pale eyes. She still didn't look real. There were less wrinkles than I'd expect to see on a child. We challenge you to a duel, Rose called out. The fairy stopped. I would sully my blade. I held out the hatchet, ready to use. Her expression didn't change in the least. Did she not know how ineffective the hatchet would be against her, or did she know and was she exceptional at hiding her tells? If she had spent centuries in some court of lies and illusion, I could buy that she was a good liar. But she was impatient, proud. Are you reluctant because you're scared of me? I asked. Direct attacks, I thought. I think you're a coward. Never, the fairy said. There was a flair of the dramatic to the word. As if she'd timed the statement to play off mine, that her earlier reluctance was solely to enable this interplay. I'll see you pay for that insult. A small oath. I felt my heart skip a beat, hearing that. But I was dead if I failed, whatever happened. What did it matter if I raised the stakes? Okay, dumb question. There were plenty of things worse than death. But everything had a price, didn't it? You couldn't win something if you didn't stake something. Then, I said. How about a wager? A prize to the winner, she asked, in that strange accent of hers. She smiled. I don't think you know how good a swordsman I am. You say that, but aren't all fairy liars? I asked. I mean, lying is at the core of your being. You're just really good fakers. I was going to humiliate you, mortal, but now I'm going to make it bad. And believe me, I can make it bad. I was the consort and protector to the High Queen's torturer. The woman taught me a great deal. So saith the liar, I said. I slapped the upper half of the hatchet's handle into my other palm. My heart was pounding, but that hardly mattered. I think you're all just a bunch of idiot practitioners who started deluding yourselves so you could lie despite the rules. Changing how you look at the world so the subjective changes? Rose asked. It makes an awful lot of sense. Look like no weapon forged by man can kill you, no weapon forged by man can kill you. You insult me, you insult my people. Shall I take you to my queen and tell her what you said, so she can devise an appropriate punishment? I think you should take the offer for a duel, I said. Or you might just be a sad, pathetic little excuse for an other who's more bluff than anything else. You're hiding behind that ridiculous, flimsy-looking sword, and the only way you can prove you aren't is by accepting the duel and winning. If they thrive on belief and perception, can I attack her on that front? I'm not trying to distract you from something else or throw some big plot at you, I said, as hard as that is to believe. What I'm saying is what I mean. I want a duel because I think I could win. Enough. What are the terms? She asked. We duel you, Rose said. Winner gets to claim a prize. Careful, Ms. Lewis murmured. Too late. I accept. For my prize, I will have your obedience, for 1 year, 1 month, 1 week and 1 day, the fairy said. She smiled. I am sworn to Mademoiselle Duchamp, but I would still like to keep you in a place just outside this world, and with my spare moments, I could amuse myself with you. Perhaps I could make the first day you spend with me worse than any day you've experienced. I could challenge myself to see if I could do the same each day thereafter. I think, I said, I might take some of your power. Good, she said. She leaped back a solid 15 feet, her feet skidding on the floor. Let us begin. Ms. Lewis, I said. Would you happen to know the name of that something nasty that might come if I called it? Yes, she said. Orneas. He once placed stars in the firmament, but he now calls them down to earth. Say his name 7 times. Perfect. Orneas, I said. I saw the fairy's eyes go wide. Orneas, I said again. She dashed towards me, trying to stop me before I finished. I clenched my fist. I still held the nails, rocks and splinters I'd grabbed from the barrel. Words and gestures had power, right? Take this. I shouted, hurling the fistful at her as if I were throwing a baseball. A left-handed throw, but still. The sharp, heavy, coarse bits of debris were coated in my blood, from the wound I'd made with my knife. Was there maybe a bit of extra power in there? Was that expenditure of power why I staggered a little, as I released them from my hand? I didn't even get to see if it inflicted any damage or if it simply bounced off of her. When I stood straight again, she had stopped. Orneas, I said. She went on the offensive. Sword still behind her, narrow space, she still brought it forward, letting it gouge and scrape the wall, bending like it had when she'd pulled it from the scabbard. I could envision it springing free, flexing back to its normal straight length, simultaneously piercing me. Every bit of her body language pointed to that same conclusion. Glamour would help things to that conclusion. I hurled the hatchet at her, overhead, two-handed. She wasn't in a position to hit it with her blade. She was in a position to strike it out of the air with the butt end of her sword. I saw a flash of a smile on her face. I'd disarmed myself. She had her victory. My focus, however, was on grabbing the longest bit of pipe that I'd kicked out into the hallway. Moving towards her, bending low to grab it. The thing was so rusty and grimy that the actual pipe itself was hard to make out. The hatchet couldn't be my weapon. Ghost inside it or no. Could this? She'd stopped moving to strike at the thrown hatchet. I had the pipe. I tried to read her expression, to see if there was any glimmer of fear, any sign that this weapon could hurt her. Nothing. Her expression still held that faint smile that suggested she was utterly confident of her victory. She started approaching me. Yes, Mr. Thorburn, I could hear Ms. Lewis from behind me. I think that'll suffice. With those words, the fairy stepped back. Her sword had somehow found its way in front of her. The point leveled my way. No reason to play fair. Orneas, I said. Orneas. She lunged, and I ducked into the room we'd vacated, hopping over the mess. I landed awkwardly, stupid for such a little jump. Orneas. I called out, in her direction. Damn me, I could feel it now. Once more, and he'd come. The fairy entered the room, sword first. Blake. What are you doing? Rose. Ambush, I said. There was a bit of a waver in my voice. Draw a line, then. I didn't even think. I ducked low, scraping the back of my bloody, gritty hand against the concrete floor. Blocking the connection. I immediately regretted it. Would it matter, when we were this close? Would it help obscure her perception of me? I had to climb to my feet. I staggered, dropping onto all fours instead. Dizzy. Drained. I'd given too much of myself, for too little. She'd entered the room. Through my peripheral vision, I could see her hesitate, losing her forward momentum. The stuff from the barrel I'd kicked to the floor. I'd almost forgotten. Before she could get her bearings, I managed to find my feet. She would be harder to hit. She was nimble, already setting her weight to spring back. It broke in 4 different places along the length. Never mind, I thought, that it had withstood worse impacts over the course of this skirmish alone. I looked at her, saw her staring at the short stump of a sword that still stuck out from the hilt. She moved her free hand over, and I could see the blade growing, repairing itself. Fragile. I struck out at it. Not fancy, no style. If she was the stylish fighter, I was the brute, the barbarian, the madman. Swinging with little caution or sense. Picking a target, then swinging at it with all the strength I could spare. I hit the weapon, and I hit her hand. She dissolved, breaking down into sparkles, specks, and dust. A trick? An illusion? When? Where? How? No, it didn't matter. I needed to bring her out of hiding, and I knew I had only one thing that would get her to. I started. A hand reached around me, fingers jammed into my mouth. Stopping me from speaking in the most base, simple way possible. I bit, turning so I could see her. In the doing, I wrenched the fingers I was biting, forcing her to partially bend over, arm twisting. She still felt pain, apparently. Quick and nimble as she was, there wasn't a lot she could do once I had my teeth in her. She still held the sword, and was drawing it back to thrust into my gut, delayed by the pain and imbalance I was causing with my teeth on her fingers. I still held the pipe. Except I was already bringing it around, driving it into the side of her stomach. The weight of her falling down pulled her fingers out of my mouth. I hit her prone body with the club. I did it a few more times for good measure. Hitting her sword hand, head, shoulder, leg. Meaty sounds. Noment, I finished. Ornament. I dropped the club, staggering away. When I dropped to all fours to throw up, it was equal measure exhaustion and revulsion. Too many bad memories. Fights that had gone very much like that one had, at the end. Base, violent, ugly. I think I see why she might have picked you, Ms. Lewis said. Blake was picked, then? Rose asked. It's not just him being the second heir. I already said too much. Take your prize, Blake. I looked up at her. She held a box in her hands. What's that box you're holding? I asked. I wiped at my mouth with my clean hand. Safety measure. For your sake. I did promise you would walk away unharmed, but for harm you brought on yourself, and that little brawl of yours could have gone either way. I closed my eyes. Opening them took some effort. Not because I was that tired, but because the way my head was swimming made me feel like I would like to keep my eyes closed and be still and quiet for the next few hours. I would hurry, Ms. Lewis said. The others are outside, there is another familiar there. They've called help, and the help will arrive within the next few minutes. We'll start running into the first of them as we leave the area, and if we get slowed down, the rest are going to catch up. I mumbled a reply. I wasn't even sure what I was saying. You okay, Blake? Rose asked. I could still hear that meaty sound of pipe hitting flesh. I looked at the fairy. She was breathing, still. She's not dead? I asked. No, Ms. Lewis said. Like most others, the fairy are very resilient, and she's drawing a kind of power from her master as well. Take your prize. What? What do I take? Go with your instincts. I might take the heart, in your shoes, but I'm not in your shoes. Just carving the damn thing out? I asked. To do what? Eat it. But it hardly matters. Let's hurry on our way. No, Rose said. The agreement was that we would duel the fairy. What if I challenged her now? She's not able to accept, I said. She already did, Rose said. So if I declare it's my turn, can I take a prize? That's sketchy, I said, and it feels like it's begging for heaps of bad karma. Some, Ms. Lewis said. But you reaped some as well. The question would be whether you could defeat someone who is already defeated. Oh, Rose said. Right. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's very doable, actually, but it requires time, and it requires you to come up with other ways of defeating her than physical. I don't understand, Rose said. I ran my hand through my hair. She's talking about torture, Rose. Torture the other I just bashed until you beat her on some mental or emotional level, then claim a prize. I don't, how can I even, being inside the mirror? I ignored her. I grabbed a piece of the broken sword, weighing it in my hand. Sharp edge. Good enough. If the fairy can reach you, we could theoretically pass her hand or arm into your realm, Ms. Lewis said. A tight fit, but if we broke the hand first. No, I said. Sorry, Rose, but no. I don't want to. I'm bothered we're even talking about this. I didn't think I'd have to do something. "'S'all right," I mumbled. I squatted beside the fallen fairy. "What are you thinking, Mr. Thorburn?" "I'm thinking we give her back." "Is it doable?" "It is. Invoke the duel, make an argument, give off the right impression, a degree of fear." "Maybe," I said. "If it's alright, can I use you to scare them?" "I'm kind of done with that for right now." "As you wish." I nodded. I reached down and cut away a lock of hair, then jammed it into my back pocket. I tossed the piece of broken sword aside. "Hey, fairy. If you're paying any attention, turn into a bird, and I'll see about giving you back." There was a long pause. A broken flutter of wings, and the other was a chickadee. I picked her up as gently as I could. I headed for the exit, stopping to get the hatchet and stowing it away in my jacket. "Sorry, June," I murmured. "Thanks for the distraction." As I passed the line I'd drawn at the top of the stairs, I could feel connections unfolding around me. Not between me and the practitioners, but between me and everyone else in the building. A door slammed somewhere. I could hear footsteps. I used the fairy's blood to break the connection and buy myself time. Emerging outside, I headed to the end of the alley. I had to break more connections that were attaching to me from every direction. 2 girls. One 11 or 12 or so, was sitting on the car hood, bundled up in a winter jacket, hat and blanket. The other, 20, was leaning against the driver's side door. Smoking. But for the age gap, they were very similar in appearance. They recognized me, and the older one stepped away from the car. A canary sat on her shoulder, spreading its wings. I could see the fear in her expression. Her hands clutched a golden plate that had been sitting in her lap. No. A small shield. What did you call a shield like that? Her implement. The older one didn't attack. She was staring at me. "We dueled," I said. My voice sounded a little hoarse. I wondered if I'd fall again here. "You're Latita and I did. I won, I took my prize." "And?" the older girl asked. "My turn." She didn't look eager. But she looked like she might be willing. "It could be," I said, but I raised my good hand, to stop her before she could do anything. "But I want you to know 2 things. Before you make that judgment call." "What 2 things?" "First off, this woman with me is one of my grandmother's lawyers. She's staying hands off, but she probably will intervene if it comes down to it. She would have, if Latita here had taken the upper hand. You get my meaning?" "I felt something," the little one said. "Building up in fits and starts." I called out a name, I said. "Latita might tell you that." 6 times out of the 7 times I needed. "It felt bad," she said. Her eyes didn't leave Latita. "I'm telling you right now." I had no intention of saying the name the 7th time. I so swear. I only needed to push Latita to act, use her impatience against her. The 2 nodded. "The second thing I want you to know, is that we had every right to challenge her 2 more times and take 2 more prizes. We didn't. We fought, I won, and I took what I'd earned. Now, if you'll allow me," I said. I very slowly approached. I extended my hand, the little bird inside. I'm giving her back. Once she took the other from my hand, I backed away. You didn't have to do that, the older girl said. We were told to stop you, the little girl said. You're dangerous. You don't even realize how dangerous you all are. We're supposed to do anything and everything we can. Hush, Joanna, the older girl said. Well? I asked. I should give my life to stop you, the girl said. Joanna doesn't know everything, but she's essentially right. I'm not talking about the past, or any of that, I said. I'm talking about this, right here, right now. Are we going to have a problem? Do I need to handle you so I can deal with your family too? Somehow. I must have looked less threatening than I had since I was little Joanna's height. Haggard, swaying on my feet, a little roughed up and dusty, hair a mess. She reached into her pocket, and I tightened my grip on my hatchet. On June. She retrieved a phone. She dialed and raised it to her ear. Mom. A pause. I know. I see them. But look at where he is. He's right in front of me and Joe right now. Another pause. The connections around me were filling with power. A spider web of interactions, waiting for something to start drawing the snare inward. Let him go, Mom. Tell Auntie to pass on the message to the cousins as well. Thank you, I said. She raised a hand, one finger extended. I'll explain later, she said. Another pause. Another pause. She shut her eyes in frustration. Her breath billowed out in a white fog as she sighed. Mom. Fine. Stop and listen, don't call it a favor, then. Call it a repayment of the favor you owe me for taking Joe to her 6 in the damn morning dance lessons for the last half a year. I could hear her mother's voice this time, faintly emerging from the phone, 3 paces away from me. Yes, Mom, I know that means I can't whine about having to take her anymore. I need to get back home before Ms. Lewis break ends, I said. No, I don't think that hell on earth is balanced out by 6 months of early morning car trips and boring weights in the gym. But maybe ask me in half an hour. Unless you want to take her today. Since you already happen to be up. She smiled a little, as her mother responded, then hung up. Her cheeks were flushed red with victory and the cold as she looked me in the eye. We're even. Thank you, I said, again. Weren't thank yous dangerous? Or was that just with barber demons? I'm Penelope, by the way, she said. My friends and family call me Penny. I felt something wet on my lip. I thought it was maybe a snowflake, but when I rubbed it off, my finger came away crimson. Blood. Not mine. The fairies. I spat it on the ground. Spit and trace amounts of blood. I looked up to see her looking a bit disgusted. Okay. I left Joe and Penelope behind as I went to go deliver the letter, Ms. Lewis 1 step behind me. Stop, Ms. Lewis told me. Look. Our destination. The building sat across the street. Squat, unimpressive, with some large windows showing bookshelves on the other side. The library? Rose asked. A government institution. If you find a lost driver's license, you can leave it in a mailbox, and the post office will take it where it needs to go. Leave a note clearly labeled for the police at a library. And they'll take it to the police, Rose said. Why did we stop? I asked. 2 reasons. Both having to do with attention. First of all, I think it would be a damn shame if you were to put all this time and effort into this, only to see it shoved into a drawer and ignored because it is inconvenient, or thrown into the trash. Give some thought to how you label it. I nodded, but my mind wasn't feeling as sharp as usual. I didn't think it was blood loss, I hadn't bled nearly that much, stabbing my hand, but I had suffered from blood loss before, and the symptoms weren't so different. Something blatant? Rose asked. Something blatant. Remember, presentation is tied to effect. Be dramatic. Something like, for the eyes of the RCMP only, contains information about the Molly Walker murder. Rose asked. Get the library people talking, word spreading, people asking about it. That'll do, Ms. Lewis said. Mr. Thorburn. I hesitated. Am I missing anything? We're about to leverage the supernatural stuff to try to ruin his non-supernatural life. There's no way this doesn't come back to bite us in the ass. We're declaring war, Rose said. But there's nothing special there. They declared it first. We're just responding. Ms. Lewis? Is there a factor I'm not paying attention to? The rules about secrecy were established for everyone's mutual benefit. Inducting too many people into this world carries too much danger, too much weight. There are no hard rules about doing this, but there are very, very few people who would be willing to, knowing the kind of enemies it makes, and the confusion and chaos it causes. So, Rose said, pausing for a second, probably to gather her thoughts. This isn't one of those situations where a rule becomes law and law becomes natural law. No. I must say I'm wondering why you returned the familiar to its master and showed some restraint, only a few minutes ago, but you are responding in this fashion to a more indirect threat. I sighed. I wasn't in a state to offer an articulate response. That's a fair assertion, Ms. Lewis said. Is this going to do enough damage, for the kind of response it's going to get? He is going to retaliate. Probably, I said. But how much worse can it be than him trying to kill us? Ms. Lewis said, individuals like him, typically, have effectively stocked up on good karma, so they might spend it in times of crisis. I have a good idea about what's happened, even if my information is incomplete, and I think he may have been holding back. Acting up front, informing you as to why he's attacking you, being honest and helpful. Inviting compromise. Tempering himself. And he's going to stop? Rose asked. Start going into debt to take us out. I glanced back the way we'd come. Nobody following. He's been holding back because he's trying to decide if I'm a threat or someone who will happily sit back and wait until he's ready to actively kill us. I'm not sure if he's made that decision yet, but I have to assume it's sliding towards the latter. Is it? Rose asked. If you take the Duchamp thing just now into account, word is going to spread about what we did. Shouldn't we seem less threatening than we did? You're making that a question, and not a statement, Ms. Lewis noted. It feels like a question, Rose said. I agree. It doesn't feel like a certain thing, I said. I'm more inclined to be paranoid. I'm betting they won't tell the full story. If only half the story gets told, then people in the Duchamp family are going to notice that the familiar is injured. They're going to know there was a fight. That is going to reflect badly on us. I agree, Rose said. Yeah. Well said. I nodded. Yeah. So it's settled. You'll send the letter, clearly marking it for what it is, so they can't ignore it. That raises the second point of interest. The anonymous note loses its impact if Blake Thorburn, new to the area, is seen on a security camera, dropping the letter off. I don't see a camera, I said. Are you looking? Ms. Lewis asked. Right. I looked. Connections. Where was attention being devoted? I couldn't see anything. Things were unfocused and unclear. I could barely make out the spirits against the gentle snowfall. I think I've spent a bit too much of my personal power. Rose? Can you see? I don't think so, Rose said. Too fast a response. I looked down to make sure that the mirror was dangling outside of my jacket. How come? I asked. I just can't. I don't think I can see spirits, after all. I was confusing it with something else. I frowned. Need more info than that. Later. We'll figure it out. Right. I was too tired to argue. Fine, but that still means we have to figure this out. Or we just ignore the cameras and deal with it. You can do it, Ms. Lewis said. Take your time, Blake, don't focus too much on the particulars. I wasn't happy, shouldering the burden here, but I did as she'd said. Rose's voice interrupted my observations. How much longer before you have to go? We can't take too long or we'll wind up walking back without you. We can't, Ms. Lewis said. But I did promise I would see you home, as safe as you allowed me to be. I feel confident Blake can get a good grasp of this. But you won't do it for us, Rose said. Still talking when I was trying to focus. You can't accept you had that box, and you were prepared to do something. I do. I was willing to violate the spirit of one oath to keep the letter of another. I'm glad I didn't have to. I tried to focus on the spirits, letting my vision blur to help ignore the snow. Focus on the things that were rising. I could see little clouds of fog around vents, where buildings were being heated. Was I looking at it wrong? The snow had its own spirits, as did the vents. I relaxed a little. The walls had their own spirits. The cold air did. I was trying too hard to see past things, and in the doing, I was missing the forest for the trees. Taking it all in was easier, when I was as tired as I was. The world had a pulse of its own. Things flowed. If I let myself get swept up in it, then I naturally saw the various things at play. The direction the wind moved, the temperature, the weather. Every time I got a grip on what I was sensing, I was already feeling my attention slip to the next. There. Cameras. I could see the focus they were devoting to an area. Almost like spotlights, as if I could see the outline of their field of view. Some more focused than others. A traffic camera here, a static and blurry image there. I could see the areas people traveled, when the day was at its height. The aftermath, the lingering emotions, almost like the community left a ghost in its wake. A mood. Blake. I stirred. You haven't been responding. You okay? My vision is swimming, I said. Don't get too deep, Rose said. That's dangerous. Maybe you're more vulnerable because you're tired. I think I am, I said. I'm going to turn it off for now. Keep from draining whatever charge is left in the battery, so to speak. Were you successful? Ms. Lewis asked. I think I saw it. Then please lead the way, Ms. Lewis told me. I did. I didn't have the benefit of the sight to make out where the cameras were, but I did remember their general locations. I crossed the empty street, tracing a lazy S on my way to the library. The drop-off box was similar to a dumpster, only half the size, and had a sign in a plastic sleeve inside, explaining what it was and the pickup hours. May I suggest saying a few words? Ms. Lewis asked. Gestures and words can both lend weight to actions. There is always something listening, after all. I'm not up to much, I said. I'm feeling pretty drained. Is this usual? No. No, it isn't. But your situation is a unique one. You mean Rose? I mean your relationship to Rose, yes. I have questions, I said, but we should get this over with. If you're not feeling up to it, I can try saying something, Rose said. Sure, I said. Laird declared himself our enemy when we first met, acting against us, misleading us into thinking we had safe passage, and abandoning us. His actions were in accord with the letter of the law, but not the spirit. We now tender our retaliation, in keeping with letter and spirit of law, to the best of our knowledge. Those who are witnessing us, beings of law, justice, and right, help guide this to the right hands. She glanced at me. Help guide it into the right hands, I said, feeling just a little lame, that I couldn't expand on the flowery, stately language. I dropped the letter into the slot on the side of the book return box. Well said, Miss Thorburn, the lawyer said. Thank you, Rose replied. You just pulled that out of your ass? I asked. I'm not bad when it comes to that stuff, Rose said. Most definitely not, I said. The letter is delivered, Ms. Lewis said. You'll want to be returning home, I expect. Yeah, I said. I feel like I could sleep for hours. This is the vestige thing, right? She smiled, the vestige thing, yes. Okay, I said. Cool. Which raises a few questions I've been meaning to ask. Keep in mind I'm here in a teacher capacity, not as your lawyer. Sure, I said. But this vestige thing dash. I can't tell you the particulars of the deal we made with the late Rose Thorburn. Speaking hypothetically, I asked. I won't answer questions about a hypothetical situation so close to my real-world knowledge, lest I give up some information I shouldn't. Okay, speaking generally then, what advantages are there to having a vestige partner? To making a close copy of someone? Can you use that to get around contracts? You can. Rose can't use magic. Is that usual? That's more of a question of environment. If Rose wanted more details on that, we could start billing you, and see what we could arrange. What do you mean by that? I asked. Environment? She's stuck in the mirror, but she'd have power elsewhere. She'd have more power in virtually any other situation, if you're talking about faculty, the ability to act. If I wanted to say more than that, I'm afraid, again, would need to bill you. Again with the billing, I said. Everything has a price, Mr. Thorburn. Even a leisurely walk and talk with me. What's the price there? Rose asked, a note of alarm in her voice. It gives me time to convince the latest diabolist of the Thorburn line, in ways both subtle and overt, to join us. You too are growing to like me, just a touch, because I'm one of your only allies in a sea of enemies. You're growing to trust me, because I'm more or less trustworthy. My knowledge can be granted in exchange for your trust. Knowledge I deem valuable enough to exact more of a cost comes with a price tag. You're not going to share the knowledge on vestiges, I said, because you know it's something big? Something we need to figure out if we're going to survive? In part. But, as a suggestion, perhaps we could go for a walk. We'll take a detour on our way back. If I give you material you can use to find your own way, instead of giving you the complete, more costly answer. A walk to where? I asked. A bit up the main road here. We'll make it back in time. No trick? Nothing conniving here? Rose asked. No. Only an illustration. Sure, I said. She smiled, pointing the direction. It was only half a block before we reached the main road. One four-lane street that ran north to south down the middle of Jacob's Bell. The buildings on either side were typical for any of the regular places between one of the major cities. Fast food places, a big gas station that stood out as much as anything, a strip mall set off to one side, with a parking lot as large as all of the collected stores put together. Here and there were other businesses, more for locals than people stopping in for a coffee and donut or to fill up their gas tanks. A vet's office in a repurposed old residence, fitting in the same general era as the Hillsglade house. I made out a hospital off to the side, just off the highway. One of the largest buildings here, and Hillsglade house was visible on the other end of the small town, looming over things. We approached the highway. The road dipped in a very deliberate way as it passed beneath, like someone might be overly cautious in avoiding hitting their heads on an overhang. The north end, Rose said. Right. The expanded city, above the highway. The note said we shouldn't come here, I said. Explicitly forbidden. Ms. Lewis said, you're with me, and I'm not going to let you enter the dangerous area. The dangerous area? Rose asked. Johannes area? Yes. We made our way up the incline that followed after the dip in the road. As we crested the top of the rise, Ms. Lewis said, what do you two see? It was the upper end of Jacob's Bell. I'm not seeing anything special, Rose said. Maybe I'm missing something. Things get indistinct as they get further from the mirror Blake is wearing. There are some reflective surfaces, but it's kind of muddled. Rose, I would suggest you look beyond the scope of the mirror. Focus on the city in the distance. Blake, use your sight. My sight isn't much better than my regular sight, I said. I burned myself out during that fight. Try. This isn't very hard, as these things go. Fact is, I suspect it will be hard to ignore. That was ominous. But I looked. Through the sight, it was all different. The sky was cast in red light, and I could see the crimson highlights on the clouds, as if the sun was in the midst of setting. At 5 or 6 in the morning. The buildings were twisted, the street more winding and narrow, the rooftops changing. All towards one peculiar, oddly cramped aesthetic. I could see people there. Vaguely, from a distance, but they were people. It's all lit up, Rose said. How did we not see this before? This is an illustration, Ms. Lewis said. I can give you answers, but dash. We'd have to pay for them, I cut her off. Right. You want us to reach our own conclusions? I think it's based on proximity. We get closer, we're stepping more into there. Well said. It's all lit up, Rose said, again. Why? Why do you think? You don't get it, Rose. I asked. Remember what Johannes said? Vestiges, I said. Or it's one vestige. A big one. How'd he do it? That is a very good question, Ms. Lewis said. One that would be very costly to buy an answer for, I'm betting, I said. Right. He took over an area, Rose said. He made it a domains, and this vestige is some kind of reflection of that domains. Or he made the vestige, I said, and made that vestige some kind of territory he could base his domains on. More likely the former than the latter, Ms. Lewis said, but I don't think you're too far off base. Rose spoke up, he took over an area and then copied it. But it's different. A vestige degrades with attention and stress, so maybe he's shoring it up with something. Some kind of power source that would twist it by association. Oh God, Rose said. Oh. Maggie said it was a place for others to relive the old days, before mankind got its footing. I thought maybe it was scaring people, picking off one every few months or so. But it isn't. If the people were copied over too, if they aren't real people, then what's to stop others from hurting them all the time? Openly hunting them down and eating them? Making it a constant, daily thing? Those people would be stuck there, like I'm stuck in the mirror. Except they have company, I said. I think we've gleaned enough from this little case study, Ms. Lewis said. I nodded, a little numb. Rose didn't say a thing, and I couldn't see her to know what she was doing or how she was reacting. Going by her tone of voice just a moment ago, I was guessing she was horrified. We collectively began our trek back to Hillsglade House. What do you think I wanted you to take away from that? Ms. Lewis asked. A place can be a vestige, I said. Ms. Lewis smiled, true, but that isn't the answer to my question. Vestiges can be twisted into something else, Rose said. And I'd have power there. You have power anywhere, Ms. Lewis said. I mean I can have magical ability there. Again, you can have magical ability anywhere, Rose, Ms. Lewis said. But that's not the issue you're trying to address. Your concern is the here and now. Right now you're in a world of mirrors, largely powerless. Blake was asking how you could achieve more faculty. And now we know, I said. You can go to a place with more people and things to interact with, Rose. I'm not sure you'd want to, given what's going on over there, but you could. I could, Rose said. A short answer, non-committal. So this psycho guy builds up this huge domains, converts it into a kind of feeding pen for others, I said. But how do we do the same thing? I'm getting the feeling we're in dire need of these three big power sources. Tool, familiar, domains. You do what you did today, Ms. Lewis said. You claim power where you can, then you make a play, using that power. Look at what you've accomplished already. An ice hatchet and a lock of hair, I said. The hair was an interesting choice, she said. Why did you choose it? Because I didn't want to hurt her while she was down, I didn't want to mess with her clothing because that's a little creepy, and I don't want to carry around some broken piece of metal from the sword. There aren't any other things I could grab. There are a great many other things you could have taken. Many more abstract than the physical things you're focusing on. But you chose the hair. You said you'd take some power when you talked to her. Did you break your oath? I honestly don't know, I said. I said a lot of things, right then. If you lie, Ms. Lewis said, you'll suffer for it. You're already drained. But she said it with a small smile. As if she already knew the answer. I don't think I lied, I said. I didn't feel like my vision got that much worse between when the fight started and when we dropped off the letter. When I said that stuff, I spoke from the heart. No deception, being direct, being blunt, like you said. The smile widened a small fraction. And I said I'd take power. I thought, taking the hair, well, if a fairy uses glamour all over the place, where are they going to use it more than in their personal appearance? You thought all that through? She asked. No. I barely thought. I was focused more on the fact I just puked, and barely being able to stand. I mean, my actions make sense to me, looking back, but it wasn't a big thing where I outlined it to myself step by step. Well, your instincts were good. Some fairy give tokens to their favorite humans and practitioners. Little objects, trinkets, scraps of cloth. Objects infused with glamour. These objects carry a kind of charge, an influence. A coin infused with a glamour that it's lucky. An earring that's infused with another sort of glamour, granting an ability. And the lock of hair? I asked. Is only a lock of hair, infused with a small glamour to keep it lustrous and pretty. But it's infused with glamour, nonetheless. In the old stories, there are tales of people given gifts, to use at certain times. Throw this hairbrush down, and it becomes a forest of trees. Throw this ribbon down, and it becomes a river. One big glamour, expending an item. This is the same thing? I asked. It can be either. A simple object with a simple benefit, or a charge of glamour to be spent. Whatever you do with it, you'll want to cultivate it. Give it your attention, make it a part of your routine, and it will gradually get stronger. Be careful, however, that you don't get used to it. Glamour is innately elusive, subtle, and misleading, images striving to slip from the conscious attention to the unconscious attention. There is a reason we don't have troves of these infused objects lying about. In the majority of cases, they become a part of the scenery and routine, they lose importance, and they seize on that to become unimportant. The fortunate coin is unfortunately lost, you see. You said everything has a cost, I said. What's the cost, here? A very good question, Ms. Lewis said. Tell me, how does it go in the stories? A woman gets the favor of a family of brownies, provided she rubs ointment on the brownie child's eyes once a night. She's warned she should never use it on herself, but she does, and she gains the ability to see the brownies as they go about their business in the city. She is discovered, and as punishment, they strike her blind. Ironic punishment, Rose said. Karma. The universe seeks balance, and it can be heavy-handed. You might earn the earring that gives you an uncanny ability to listen, and this is tolerable, because you earned it. But when the earring is lost, balance is restored, and dash. You might go deaf, I said. Or you could lose the ability to hear kind words, or you could get the ears of an ass and your ass ears can't understand everyone's mocking whisperings behind your back. I think I get the drift. You do. Think of what you're willing to lose before you turn that lock of hair to a purpose. Should you misuse it or treat this little thing of power poorly, you'll pay a price equal to what you gained. But for the time being, I recommend you take time for it. If nothing else, it's a hair grenade, I said. Pull the pin, throw it, make a spiderweb or something. I don't think it's a suitable thing for fighting, Ms. Lewis said. You won't get as much effect out of it there. It could even backfire. Keep in mind that it was and is hair, and it lends itself to similar purpose. Right, I said. Hair's purpose. We were approaching Hillsglade House. Only a few minutes away, now. Where do I go looking for a familiar? I asked. Where do you go looking for a date? Ms. Lewis asked me. You're looking to make a long-term commitment. You don't leap into it, you put yourself out there, in the sort of place that you might ordinarily like to spend your time, doing what you do best, or doing what you enjoy most. You introduce yourself to those of similar interests. Get to know them. See how compatible you are. Only after some time do you make the investment. That kid just now found a familiar at 13 or so, I said. It was Rose who answered me, not Ms. Lewis. Arranged marriages exist even today. Even in Canada, they're happening. Not so hard to believe a family would set something up with familiars, given how backwards this community seems. Exactly, Ms. Lewis said. Okay, then forget familiars. Implement? I mean, we read the books on this stuff, but dash. But you're lost. The implement requires a more intimate knowledge of yourself. Who are you, and how do you address the rest of the world? Some people find this an easy decision to make. They know they are warriors at heart, or thinkers. For others, it's a very nuanced choice. A small few rush into it, and they find they've crippled themselves. Haste makes waste, Rose said. I asked. That sounds familiar. Romeo and Juliet? Rose asked. Last year of high school. I didn't have a last year of high school, I said. I left home. Still sounds familiar. One of the things we read, Rose said. Idea's the same. We rush into this thing, getting one of the big three power sources, we could wind up crippling ourselves. Except the Duchamps are giving kids this stuff. Setting them up with deals. Aren't they kind of making waste with haste? I asked. Making waste with haste? Rose asked me. It sounded better before I said it out loud, I said. Ms. Lewis said, they're making a sacrifice on one front for assets on another. Children raised in that fashion may struggle in some respects, but they'll have a foundation of having grown up in this world. Experience and knowledge. Well, I don't have experience, I said. I don't have time either. We reached the block where the hill and house sat inside the short wall and fence. I don't have the time, ability, or inclination to go into too much detail about why, Ms. Lewis said, but I would recommend you hurry, Mr. Thorburn. Haste might make waste, but as you say, you don't have time. Rose asked, so what do we do? We can't afford to spend too many days doing what we did with the ghost or picking fights. We won't make it. We can't get real power without having power to start with. Ms. Lewis said, to clarify, you do have power. You simply aren't willing to use it to its full effect. I don't want anything like the barber as a lifelong companion, I said. It isn't as grave a thing as you're imagining, Mr. Thorburn. I've tried to equip you with what you need to defend yourself and defend Ms. Thorburn in the mirror there, but taking on a lifelong companion you don't have any fondness for is a very small compromise, when your life expectancy is as short as it is. I started, but I found myself lost for words. The words hit me hard enough that I reeled a bit. I wasn't quite up to par, I was a bit wobbly. Still, it still said something that I found myself stepping back, reaching for the painted iron railing so I could hold on and keep from landing ass first on the sidewalk. She continued, relentless, maybe in weeks, maybe in months, and maybe in years. There is a good chance it is going to be horrible. It might be violent, and if it is, that will be merciful, because the other sorts of horrible are worse than mere violence. I started, but the words weren't coming out. You're kind of less likable than you were 10 minutes ago. You might not like me for saying this much, but you'll respect it, and I think that, provided you last long enough, you'll see the honesty in it. You have options. Our firm is one such option. You're callow, you're new to this, and your value to us is particularly low. But we can negotiate with you and Ms. Rose here, and I think we can find a way to keep you both on board. Reaching out to things like the barber is another option, power at a high price, power you could use to live. The third option, the most noble of your options, would be to make the most of your time, fight every step of the way as you fought with that fairy, and come to accept your reality for what it is. Make decisions, hurry, make errors in the process, but take the power you need, and use that power to pave a way for your successor, remove her enemies from the world, and pray that your work means she doesn't have to do the same for her successor in turn. I thought of Catherine. The next in line. The oldest of us cousins. A woman with a husband and newborn kid. I couldn't see it. Is this some trick? Some fancy wording to scare me, kick my ass and get me into gear? I can't lie, Blake Thorburn, Ms. Lewis told me. The words were uncomfortable, heavy, and they took the wind out of me. That's not fair, I said. I can only tell you how things stand. No, it isn't graceful or pretty. You aren't liable to be as happy or powerful as you would be in a world where your grandmother and the ones who came before her weren't diabolists. You need to complete those rituals, because the fourth option, meeting a stupid, pointless end. It's a very real, very likely option. And me? Rose asked. Your future is tied to his. His success is your success. His failure is your failure. Work with him, find a balance, and help him, so he might help you. Now, I've given the two of you a great deal of information and a great many answers. Hopefully that sets you on a more productive path. I'm hoping that path is one that leads to us, when you're stronger, more knowledgeable, and more useful to us. If it supports your family, however, I'm nearly as content with that end result. But please, don't die a pointless death. Sentiment? I asked. My voice was a bit clipped with anger. I'm not sure if I would have toned it down if I'd known it would be before I'd opened my mouth. Yes, sentiment. I'd hate to think my time here accomplished so little, helping two novices who summarily got themselves murdered. That's a large part of the sentiment, if not the largest. I admit, enjoy your company, and I enjoyed having some time to relive my earliest days as a practitioner. New to this world. That's another part of it. But it's mostly business, not sentiment, and I can't do much work with dead clients. One of us partners will see you shortly, to see how far you've come. With my advice here in mind, I'm going to hope that you have one of the rituals complete, Mr. Thorburn. You're setting a deadline? I asked. I am. Decide for yourself. Do you know where you want to be for the rest of your life? The kind of place you would make your home? The kind of place that is as comfortable with you as you are with it? Find a domains. Fight for it, and if you've picked the right place, that fight won't be so hard. There isn't a place I want to be, I said, except somewhere that isn't here. There's my apartment in Toronto, but even that's more about the people than the place itself. Do you know the company you're willing to keep? You need to know who you are to know who or what you might spend the rest of your life with. Do you have interests? A passion? Find an other in keeping with those ideas, and make them your familiar. We'd stopped by the gate. Lifelong companionship? I couldn't even wrap my head around that. I was only barely learning to trust friends, and they were adapting to me in turn. Those were friends. Exceptional, rare, people. Finding a familiar, among a sea of cunning and conniving others who wanted to murder me? No, I said. I don't think I can do that. Not in a month. Not in a year. Then it's a question of direction, of focus, figuring out how you'll address the situation you're in, how you address any situation. A cup, a container, to store power. Useful, but no. A weapon, to fight back. I thought of hitting the fairy with the pipe. The sound of meat on flesh. I shook my head. A defensive object? A symbolic one? A personal one? I don't know, I said. I'm sorry. You have a little under a month to find out. Now, I should be going about now, and I think you have a guest waiting for you. I turned to look. A girl in a checkered scarf, sitting on the stairs by the front door. Maggie, Rose said. Shall I walk you up to the door? I don't think it could hurt, I said. We made our way up. Maggie gave Ms. Lewis a wary look as we reached the bottom of the steps. Problem? Ms. Lewis asked. Nope, Maggie responded. Who are you? An acquaintance of the late Mrs. Thorburn, the lawyer said. I could see Maggie's eyes widening. Oh, she said. She made a face, like she was trying to get something out and couldn't. A stutterer mid-stutter. Golly. Golly, Ms. Lewis responded, deadpan. I let myself into the house, then turned around, standing just inside the doorframe. Safe. Is that all, Mr. Thorburn? I think so, I said. Ms. Lewis. Yes, Mr. Thorburn. I'm not feeling too articulate. I'm a little wrung out, metaphorically speaking. But thank you. Sincerely, thank you. All of that information, even the talk about me dying, it helps. It helped, but it didn't make it easier to swallow. She smiled a little. Good on you. Manners matter. I'm glad if my advice helps you, even the less pleasant bits. I watched her walk away. You okay, Blake? Rose asked. I nearly forgot about Mirror Girl, Maggie said. Hi there, Mirror Girl. Her light-hearted tone was very much in contrast to what I was feeling. Ms. Lewis had waited until the last minute or two to lay the heaviest stuff on me. I sighed, running my hand through my hair. I wanted nothing more than to shut the door in Maggie's face and then collapse and sleep for the next 10 hours, but I couldn't offend a whatever Maggie was. Not an ally, but not wholly an enemy either. At this point I was willing to settle for an enemy pretending to be a friend. Hi, Maggie, Rose said. We might have to talk to you another time, if possible. Sure, Maggie said. I just woke up extra early so I could see you guys before school, but whatever. No pressure. Only a teeny bit sarcastic. We were just talking about some pretty big stuff, and we nearly got killed in a fight, Rose said. Sure. I get it. I'll bug you another time. She hopped to her feet, rubbing at her legs and rear end where she had been sitting on the cold stairs. Before she could go, I called out, Maggie. She turned. You have an implement? Familiar? Domains? Yes, no and no. Can I see? She bent down, reached into her boot, and withdrew a small knife in a sheath. When she pulled it free, though, I saw it wasn't a knife. The little dagger had a funny blade, wavy. It looked more decorative than useful. What is it? I asked. Chris-style athame. It's used a lot in Wicca, but that's more because this one guy was a blade aficionado. I like it more for its roots as a sacrificial blade. You do much sacrificing? Rose asked. Nah. But I like the old stuff, the mysteries, the biblical stories about God as a deity of sacrifice and blood. It resonated with me. That's not reassuring, I said. I'm not the reassuring type, Maggie said. Why do you need reassuring, anyway? I was thinking I started. Then I stopped. I didn't quite have the wherewithal to say everything that needed to be said. To outline the key points, to make sure we were careful. You want to invite her inside? Rose asked. I felt a measure of gratitude. Yeah. But I need you to do the wording thing. Do you agree to do us and our property no harm? Heck yeah. You enter with no ill will in your heart. I'm loving the old school wording. You guys are inviting me inside and maybe giving me a peek at something new. You're my new best friends. No negative intentions to speak of. No cunning, hostility, tricks, traps, lies, deceptions, distractions, violence or any of that intended. You'll take nothing of ours unless you have express permission, and take nothing you learn inside these walls to our enemies. Heck with those guys, your secrets are yours, and I'm not stupid enough to tank my karma by betraying hospitality and stealing. No, if you need me to actually say it, I won't steal and I won't tell anyone. You accept that this invitation is this one time only? I accept. Except I gotta leave in, like, 20 minutes. School. I kind of promised the dads, and they know about this magic stuff, even if they aren't into it, and they aren't above squeezing promises out of me. Rose had gone silent. All right then, I said. The house is getting cold with the door open like this. Come on in. Maggie practically skipped in her hurry to come indoors. The door shut heavily behind her. Maggie glanced over the books. First Famulus, then Implementum, Domains, and then Famulus again. Rose was watching Maggie, but I had still taken the time to collect the medicine kit and a damp towel and bring everything into the living room with me. More stuff in the way, a more crowded space. I took my time disinfecting my hand, cleaning it up where I'd stabbed it. The blood had trickled out and into the palm, collecting with the bits of rust and dirt where I'd reached into the trash can. All right, Maggie said. You've got good stuff, and I admit you've got me hooked. You want me to be an unofficial ally, in exchange for free access to your books. I'd be down. I glanced at Rose. Did you do any negotiating in the 20 seconds I was in the bathroom? No negotiating. We didn't propose anything like that, I told Maggie. Are you trying to pull a fast one on us, Maggie? Rose asked. Nah. I just figured I'd put it out there. See if it got any traction. You said you wouldn't try anything, I said. No bad intentions in my heart, really, but I've got to get the best deal I can for me. I sat there, glaring at her, but she only smiled. This is exhausting, Rose said. Watching every word you say, watching every word others say. I nodded. I felt a bit weary myself. Maybe having company when I was this worn out was a problem. But an ally was an ally, so to speak. Even if that ally was grubbing for any advantage she could get. I guess it's not so bad when everyone's not trying to take you out of the picture, Maggie said. Guess not, I responded. I looked my hand over, and then set to bandaging it. I was collecting a lot of small wounds. The cuts from the bird skull things hadn't yet healed, and I had sliced at my fingers once or twice to draw blood. You've got something I want, I've got something you want. So I can propose another deal. You loan me out some reading material, and I promise not to kill you. There was a pause. Maggie looked at me and Rose with a kind of expectant look on her face. You still have no bad intentions? Rose asked. Huh? Threatening to kill us if we don't comply? Rose asked. No. No. I worded that badly. I mean, I'll take the deal. Agree to the ceasefire you proposed at the meeting. Meaning that on top of the gift of reading material, we'd be giving you the other parts of that deal, with protection from whatever might come out of our grandmother's books. Darn straight. That doesn't seem very even, Rose said. Supply and demand, my dear friend in the mirror. You have a demand for not being murdered. I can supply that demand. I don't think that's how it works, I said. Why not? Look, you want lots of a product I'm offering, called not being horribly killed. You want it badly enough that I can raise the price. You benefit, because you get lots of not being horribly killed. I benefit because, hey, I get stuff. No, Rose said, I'm pretty sure the two of us understood that. And, on the plus side, if you're wanting to put the squeeze on the other guys, then you can get them to panic just a little when you tell them there are only 2 deals left before they're out of luck. 3, Rose said. If someone wants to take the deal where they can still come after us if they tell us who killed Molly. I forgot about that, Maggie said. You won't have much luck. Couple of the Behame kids met me at school, told me that they're going around, talking to everyone and making sure that they weren't giving you information that might start something none of us want to start. Most people are sworn to secrecy, at this point. Most? What about the others? Rose asked. I was sitting on the edge of the couch, elbows on my knees, hunched over. I met Maggie's eyes. What about you? The ones who swore to secrecy also agreed to go after the people who blabbed, she said. Did you agree? I asked. I was getting damn tired of people who didn't answer the questions they were being asked. She shook her head. No. But it doesn't matter, now, does it? I could tell you what happened, but then I'm probably going to wind up with some rather angry people coming after me. Yeah, I said. I get it. We'd do something similar in her shoes, Rose said. I grunted noncommittally. That's her stuff, there. Maggie asked. I had to raise myself up off the couch a bit to see where she was pointing. The duffel bag and pile of clothes was still on the floor just beneath the arm of the couch. I collapsed back onto the cushions. Yep. Didn't really know her that well. Saw her a few times. She didn't show at the council meetings until the last month, and I don't think she was game. Took her longer than it took you guys to realize you can go out and maybe not die. We've had escorts, and promises of protection in one way or another, Rose said. Still, Rose said. It's dangerous. We've gotten hurt every time. I've gotten hurt, you mean, I said. Yes. More than your predecessor did, oddly enough, Maggie did. Did she do any of the practitioner stuff? Rose asked. She did. Yeah. She knew some tricks. Mostly defensive. Warding things off. Knew the essentials of how to deal with every one of the creepy crawlies out there. But knowing what you're doing doesn't make life easier when the others scare the wits out of you, you know. You don't think straight, you make mistakes. I suppose, I said. I was trying to visualize it. Did you talk to her? Rose asked. Once or twice. She was kind of freaked out, Maggie said. You didn't try to help? Rose asked. That's I dunno. I'm not sure how I would've or could've, Maggie said. I've been trying to put myself in the heads of the other locals, Rose said. Yourself included. I understand that they are scared. I understand that our family has a history of meddling in pretty dangerous things. But then I look at the difference between the Duchamp kids and the Duchamp parents, like we saw earlier. Maybe better to not say anything there, I commented. What do you mean? Rose asked. I rubbed at my eyes. Might be they don't want their actions broadcasted or gossiped about. I'm sworn to secrecy about anything I discover inside this house, aren't I? Maggie asked. You are, I said. But betraying confidence, implicitly or otherwise, it seems messy. Bad karma, maybe. Point, Maggie said. Change of topic then. I don't get a lot of what's going on, politically. I have to trade for every tidbit of information I get. Even about the obvious stuff you read about in those books. I'm kind of new here, though. New to this, to everything. I've only been at this for half a year. I nodded. My stomach was burbling just a bit. Maybe a factor in why I felt so drained. I'd given up blood, skipped meals, missed sleep. Those things had to be fundamental to personal power. I stood up. I'm going to get something. You want anything? I asked. Beer. Something I can legally give you. Nah. I'm all right. I made my way to the kitchen. Can I ask, Maggie? What's your story? My story? She asked, calling out from the living room. I glanced, and saw she had picked up Famulus again. You got started somewhere. Didn't we all? No games, please, Rose's voice came from the living room. If you don't want to say, you don't have to say, but I'm on the same page with Blake about being horribly fed up with this double talk. Maggie didn't respond to that. Searching the kitchen for foodstuffs, I found some bread in the freezer. A little freezer burned, and showing signs of what might be mold. Well, no use wasting it. I cut the mold off, buttered it, cut up the remaining chunk of cheddar and layered it between the two slices before throwing it in a frying pan. Maggie appeared in the doorway, leaning against it with her arms folded, so she had both me and Rose in her line of sight. What do you know about goblins? Ugly, I said. Brutish, warlike, twisted, brimming with all sorts of emotional negativity. That's essentially it. You know their weak point? Iron, I said. They're creatures of nature. Iron. But they're warriors, understand? They use iron. They make weapons. They're of nature, but so is snake venom, so is cancer, understand? They're the ugly bits. The savage, primitive, visceral, Neanderthal bits. Once upon a time, it was pretty standard for goblins to give humans a hard time. Steal unattended objects, suck a cow's udders dry before the farmer could milk them, spread plague, tangle hair, gobble up anyone who got turned around in the woods and passed by the same place 3 times. I nodded. I used a fork to lift the corner of the bread and see how it was browning. A few reasons they stopped. The first is that practitioners started going after their leaders. The dumbest, meanest, most savage of them got snapped up and jammed into objects, or they got sealed, stuck in holes and covered up with rocks, yada yada. And there aren't many powerful goblins who aren't kind of stupid and savage. Rose asked something I couldn't make out. Maggie nodded. Yeah. There are some scary ones out there. Even now. Real monsters. But I'm getting off topic. The second big reason that the goblins stopped picking on humanity was that we went and got ourselves modern plumbing. You know that bit, about how vampires can't cross running water. Water is life, it's natural, and it naturally draws out the deathly energies. Well, for goblins, metal does the same thing, and it takes a bit out of them when they pass over a place where metals are buried. More so if that metal is charged with any power. Pipes under the streets? I asked. The flowing water gives it some basic elemental power. They don't like it, saps their energy when they do a little hop, skip or jump over the barrier. So they lurk around the city instead of inside it. In rural areas, other places where water service is more inconsistent. Or smaller towns, where the local infrastructure taxes them a little less for getting from A to B. Like Jacob's Bell, I could hear Rose. Yep. Among other places. Redneck scumholes are sort of scumholes because goblins hang around there, you know. The little twits have their fun making paint peel prematurely, stealing a little money here or there, pulling stuff apart, making it so cars break down, and so on and so on. People who wind up in slums and scumholes find it just a little bit harder to get out, when things refuse to pick up and run smoothly. Rose said something. I only caught the tail end, fair game. Open season, Maggie agreed. Once you fall far enough through the cracks, you start losing the protections most of humanity enjoys. The kid that locks himself in his room and never comes out, the antisocial couple, the poor schmo who loses his house and business. If the goblins manage to help someone down that path, drag them down a little further, and some other doesn't go after the unfortunate soul, they get to enjoy the reward. Goblin SOP. Standard Operating Protocol. making everyone's bad days a little worse. A memory crossed my mind. Being woken from my sleep by a beating. The mocking laughter. Never seeing their faces, because I had to cover my head, because I had blood in my eyes. One of them had called it off. Let me limp away, crawl away when the limping proved too difficult. They let me think I could maybe get to a busier street where I could beg for help, then kicked me one last time, hard enough to prove me wrong. And another memory, one I had told Rose about, not long ago. Being shot with BB guns. The bruises, the way my arm had changed colors, and the fear I'd felt, wondering if I needed to go to the hospital. There had been no laughter that time. They had lurked in the shadows, firing until they had no more ammunition, watched me struggle, then feigned like they'd reloaded and were going to shoot me again, just to see me flinch. I'd gone still for a time, and they had moved on when I looked up again. Both memories had distorted. Spend too long without revisiting memories, and they had a way of twisting. When I remembered the laughter being a little too much, a little too high-pitched from some, too deep from others, I told myself it was just my memory playing tricks on me. When I remembered the mix of heights and body types of the ones with the BB guns, just one half-step outside the bounds of what one would expect from a typical crowd of people, I told myself the same. Tricks of memory. Easy to believe, especially when you didn't want to think about it. I didn't like it. I was already feeling like half a person, using the wrong soaps, being in an unfamiliar place, acting like someone entirely different in the heat of a fight, beating a woman as something to the point that she couldn't move. This was one more straw on the camel's back, and I wasn't sure what was going to give. I grabbed my sandwich. Aren't immortal, Maggie was saying. They die like you or me. But they breed. I'd be really interested in reading a book about goblins, to see how that's linked to their personal power, or see what keeps that in check. I've become something of a goblin queen. A what? I asked. Someone works with spirits almost exclusively. Shaman. Work with time, you're a chronomancer. Fire. Pyromancer. The future. Augur, predictomancer, something like that. Work with demons, you're a diabolist. Work with goblins. Goblin queen. Johannes would be a goblin king, then? Rose asked. Johannes is Johannes. He works with anything and everything. Others call him a sorcerer, so that's what I'm gonna call him. Making you the resident goblin queen. Is that by choice or happenstance? Rose asked. Yes, Maggie said. Former and/or latter. You wanted to know where I come from? I came from a place that was falling through the cracks. And just like goblins might go after someone who's slipped through civilization's secure embrace, they'll go after a location. And it was bad. Bad enough that not all of us made it out. And even though goblins did this sort of thing to you, you'll keep their company? Work with them? I asked. My food sat on my plate, untouched. I wasn't that hungry anymore. Seal them, bind them, enslave them, Maggie said. You gotta own the past, don't you? Own the bad parts as well as the good. Let it make you stronger. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger? I asked. Yes. Exactly. I always hated that phrase, I said. No. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. Weren't you telling me the other day that you survived some bad stuff, and so you've got keener instincts? Rose asked. I said something like that, I said. I'm not sure I'm stronger as a whole, though. My eyes darted in Maggie's direction. I added, maybe we can have this conversation another time. Rose nodded. As if it was some way of fixing the unease I felt, I picked up the almost forgotten sandwich and took a bite. I dunno why, Maggie said, but it's kind of eerie seeing you two disagreeing. I thought somehow that mirror girl was some sort of subservient vestige thing, but she's got a real personality. We're not giving up too much information on that front either, Rose said. It's kind of a sore point. Sorry. Sore point. No prob. I'm not going to tell you guys my whole story, you don't have to tell me yours. I gotta go soon, though. School, promises. If we're going to hash something out, we shouldn't waste time. We could invite you back, I said. Same rules. I could accept, she said, matching me in terms of how non-committal I was being. We sort of dropped the first bit of conversation we were having. Figuring out what sort of deal we were negotiating. It's not so bad. Apply a little pressure, get one person on board. I really wasn't up to negotiating. Rose, however, jumped into it, we're giving you a fair bit. Not to be rude, but you seem to have an awful lot of demand too. For knowledge, for books. I'll live if the deal doesn't go through, Maggie said. She left the other half of her statement unsaid. We might not. You're really big on the unreasonable bargain, Rose said. I would say I'm really big on not getting the short end of the stick. Had enough of that, thank you, Maggie said. Throw us a bone, Rose said. What sort of bone? You're taking knowledge out of our hands every time you walk off with a book, and you're putting us at risk and some small inconvenience every time we accept you in, assuming you might want to do your reading here. I was kind of hoping we could be friendly-ish, Maggie said. Give and take, in terms of enjoyment of one another's company. I'm flattered, I said. I hadn't meant it to sound as morose as it did. I was tired. Not functioning. The food might have been helping, though. I felt a fraction better, having eaten. Even if it was stale bread and a bit of cheese. Let's not count on friendship, Rose said. Take the friendship out of the equation, and we're the ones with the short end of the stick. Having someone show up unexpectedly, occupying our time when we could be focusing on something else. We need allies, Rose, I said. We do, she agreed. But let's call this what it is. Maggie wouldn't be here if she didn't think she could get something. She's going to take a bit of our hospitality, she's going to make use of our books. I'm thinking we ask for a little something each time. A little something? Maggie asked. She raised an eyebrow, giving me a very deliberate head-to-toe once-over look. A small favor, a token gift, a bit of power, some knowledge, Rose said, trailing off. As what? Payment for access to a given book. Essentially, Rose said. Everything has a price, doesn't it? Maggie nodded. It does. So. You get someone accepting your deal. Non-aggression from me. You get a little something anytime I get your book. Or visit, Rose cut in. Maggie made a face. You don't like me very much, do you? I like you fine, Rose said, in what were maybe the least friendly-sounding words I'd heard out of her mouth. Aha. So you get the ceasefire from me, a gift of some small to moderate value for allowing me access to this house or access to your stuff. Unless you waive it. Like, if I have something really good, and you decide it's worth a bit more than usual. I think that's fair, Rose said. Good. I get access to knowledge, as you permit, though I get something. I get a guarantee, too, that you're going to do something to keep your demons from hurting me. To be frank, I said, I dunno how. What Blake means is we'll find a way. You'll have definite, distinct protections against anything we contract with. Good enough. You're not planning on summoning anything bad, are you? No, Rose said. If we do anything, it's going to be accidental. You swear? Rose glanced at me. I nodded. I so swear that we have no intention of summoning anything of the nature you're talking about, Rose said. Then promise you'll protect me when and where you're able, using the knowledge and tools you've got, Maggie said. I'll settle for that. Vague. I wouldn't have settled for that sort of protection. I was too tired to look up, so I only gave a thumbs up. Should the deal go through, I promise that will be the case, Rose said, again. Good enough for me. Yeah. That sounds pretty good. Is a verbal contract okay? No, I said. No. Maggie asked. No, I repeated myself. No verbal contract. We can hash it out in writing. Written contract. Isn't that more dangerous? Room for traps and loopholes? Maggie asked. Not if we keep it simple, I said. Which we can. After I get a good night's sleep and talk things over with Rose. But the interior of my skull is feeling a bit slow, I'm tired, and I'm not focused. Tomorrow, or the day after. Maggie groaned, flopping back in her chair. Yeah. Except it never works out that smoothly. I don't think anything is going to change in the next day or two, Rose said. I'm sorry, but I sort of agree with Blake. We should be careful and deliberate in anything we do. You don't think anything is going to change? What? You want a chance to spy on me? Run a background check on the local? Are we going to start fighting? Rose asked. Because that's a bad sign, if we descend into animosity so readily. Animosity? I asked. Readily? I've been reading too many of these old books, Rose said. I don't want to be animostic, Maggie said. I just want power. And everyone's keeping it to themselves and making me pay out of the nose for it. I get teased with it, and it never gets delivered in full. Porrick, the North End sorcerer. Dangerous guys to be associating with, I said. Maggie was up and out of her seat in an instant. I don't have a choice. Wrong thing to say, wrong time. I hadn't realized how upset she was, how it's barely restrained. Not if I want to do something. And I don't not want to do something because I did that when I had to watch my old neighborhood go up in blood and fire. Calm down, Rose said. Maggie switched to a more sarcastic tone. Oh, yeah, how often does that work? Tell someone to calm down and they chill out. I don't know, Rose said. But I think, given that this is Blake's house, and he can ask you to leave at any time, and we do want to work with you, we'll all be happier if this conversation doesn't escalate into something ugly. Maggie deflated a little. Crumbs. Well put, I said. Do me a favor. Take a minute, we can enjoy a bit of silence, I'll try not to fall asleep, and we start again when we all have our thoughts in order. I gotta head to school in a few minutes, Maggie said. Don't have a lot of time. Please? I asked. I'm really not a patient type, but sure. Thank you, Rose murmured. Maggie collapsed into her chair. I took my time getting up, cleaning off the plate and putting it away in the drying rack. I debated coffee, checking the tin. Just enough grounds to tantalize me with the possibility, but leave me short of a decent brew. I settled for tap water, instead, and felt suitably depressed over it. I set a glass in front of Maggie before taking my spot on the couch. Cool? I asked. I'm all right. All right, I said. You understand that we have to be careful? Yeah. And I did use the moment of silence to think. As apology for my outburst, and maybe a bit of incentive to get you on board. She reached behind her back, and she put a piece of intricately folded paper on the table. She used a flick of her index finger to send it sliding across the table. I didn't touch it. What is it? One tidbit I was able to pick up these past few months was about Eastern styles. India, some of Japan. See, they aren't big on familiars and implements and domains. Well, the Western-influenced ones are. But they prefer to remain hands-off, delineate pretty severely. Their preference is to contain, bind, leash. Okay, I said. We walk around with the metaphorical equivalent of a canine companion. They work with us, they help us hunt or they get our food, they get the benefits of cozy mortal living, we get the benefit of their talents. In the East, in the places I'm talking about, they prefer to leash the things. They tie their dogs to trees. Or keep them behind fences. You get my meaning? I think so, I said. That right there is an ofuda. Your metaphorical dog in a cage, and it's not a big dog, but it's still a dog. It barks, it bites. A goblin. A little bundle of mean. He'll come out gnashing and snarling, so point him away from you and at whoever you want to hurt. I picked it up. Amassing a bit of a collection of trinkets today. Hatchet with a ghost inside, a lock of a fairy's hair, now this. Yeah. I had to stand to move my sweatshirt and draw the hatchet from where I'd jammed the handle in by my hip. I needed a better way of holding it close to me. I put it on the table beside the slip of paper. Still standing, I removed the lock of hair from my back pocket. It was only after I'd withdrawn it that I realized I'd managed to get it all in and out of my pocket without losing any. If it had been my hair, I'd be finding hair in my back pocket for weeks. May I see the axe? Maggie asked. Look, but don't touch, I said. And it's a hatchet, not an axe. Semantics. Do you not live in this world? Rose asked. Semantics are important. The phrasing made me think of Paige. God damn, I needed to interact with a familiar face so badly right now. Heck, even an unfamiliar face, it would make a world of difference to ground me, to give me a solid injection of reality and sanity. Admittedly true, Maggie was saying. They are important. And people who argue over semantics are still a pain in the bum. You've got to explain how you lost the ability to swear, Rose said. I don't got to do anything, Maggie said. Unless we arrange that deal, and you agree that tidbit of knowledge is worth the loan of a book. I could follow the conversation, but wasn't quite feeling up to joining in. I looked at the piece of folded paper with letters scrawled on it in ink, then slipped it into the little mini pocket of my right jeans pocket. I'll be right back, I said. Gotcha, Rose said. To Maggie, she said, that sets a bad precedent. You'll be more inclined to hold details back just so you can sell them to us. I didn't hear the rest, as I headed up the stairs. I entered my grandmother's room and paused, taking it in. Nothing had changed since our conversation. The bed was made, maybe a little dusty, everything was in order. As though she had just left yesterday. I could feel her presence here. Not in a ghostly way, but in a general way. I looked over the top of one dresser, where her old jewelry was arranged in boxes and on stands. Modest stuff, not ostentatious. Relatively little jewelry, all things considered. My plan was to grab a fine chain, if I had to settle for the bare minimum. Something stronger than cord or thread. I didn't have to settle. A locket dangled from one of the racks. Simple, unembellished. Only a rectangle with rounded-off edges. I had to move other necklaces to grab it. When I popped it open, I found a sprig of some herb, dried up long, long ago, inside. I sniffed it. Lavender. I could see my grandmother wearing it as a precaution against something specific. I could also see her wearing it for the smell alone. Very carefully, without touching it, I tapped it against the side of the dresser. It wouldn't do to poison myself with something I was misidentifying. I made my way back downstairs, open locket in hand. A classic container for a lock of hair. When I reached the door to the living room, however, I found both girls looking in one direction. The front door. I went, then peered through the window. A moment later, I opened the door. It was Laird, in plain clothes. Hello, Officer Behame. Did you think I wouldn't realize it was you? I thought you might, I answered. A declaration of war, Mr. Thorburn. Call it what you will. Retaliation. He sighed. The lines in his face seemed a little deeper. A tell. Was he hiding anger or other sadness? Or was he not a morning person? I'm disappointed, he said. You sound like my dad used to, when you say that. I'd hoped you would accept the temporary peace I was offering. We didn't have to be enemies in the strictest sense. But I can be the dim-witted buffoon that you can abandon for the others to get, after you'd promised me safe passage. I asked. You can conspire against me at the meetings. You want me to accept the meager kindness and peace you offer. It would be smarter, he said. That's called shaking the hand you're offering in friendship, while knowing your other hand is balled up into a fist and you can't wait to use it to punch me in the balls. Very colorful, Mr. Thorburn. I'm not, I should stress, in a joking mood. Oh. I asked. Did I inconvenience you? Marginally. I'm more inconvenienced by the knowledge that we now have an ongoing dispute. Leaving things be fails to resolve anything. You're dangerous. Your continued existence puts my family at risk. I no longer believe you're going to abstain from the darker subject matters your grandmother freely dabbled in. I have no reason to expect you'll be as discreet or careful as she was. Finally, we do need things settled before the paradigm here changes. It might have helped that I was as tired as I was. I was disconnected enough that I was able to look like I didn't give the slightest shit. I saw his expression change a fraction, the lines deepening some. I'm forced to take action. You're not taking this seriously. I'm tired, I said. I'm not talking tired in the sense that I'm exhausted because I'm fighting for my life. I'm tired in the sense that I want to go take a nap. I woke up early to deliver that letter, and I spent some power along the way. I'd very nearly mentioned the fight with the Duchamp girl's familiar, but I'd decided against mentioning that in case it got around and bit her in the ass, then bit me back on the karma front. Well, he said. Far be it from me to keep you from your nap. Thank you, I said. Is that all, then? 2 or so things, if I may. First of all, you can expect me to respond. It should be tomorrow, and you'll notice it, even if the impact isn't immediately clear. I'm rather confident you'll regret getting on my bad side. And here we went. That's a shame, I said. Second, I see you have a guest. That would be him. He tilted his head a little, then spoke loud enough to be heard in the living room, Maggie Holt. I heard noise. Footsteps followed, with Maggie coming to stand beside me, hands jammed in her pockets to ward off the cold that was blowing in from outside. I wasn't sure if it was clear, Laird said, but when my nephews met with you, they were supposed to hint that you should abstain from any contact with Mr. Thorburn and his vestige. They hinted. You could say I didn't get it. You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Holt. I seem to, she responded. He took that in, taking his time with it, as he might digest a very profound statement. His eyes found mine. Mr. Thorburn. Can we wrap this up? Unless your big plot to remove me from this world involves running up my heating bill. I tell you this with no expectations. I do not want or desire what you have offered in any deals you've proposed, and I have sworn not to accept any such offers. The words had a bit of substance to them, a care that woke me up a little from my general exhaustion. Yeah? I asked. Maggie Holt is the one who orchestrated the attack on your cousin, Molly Walker. She had command of several goblins and ordered them to strike her and leave her alive. She did it at our behest, in exchange for small favors, gifts of power and offers of knowledge. I was glad for that exhaustion. It kept me from doing anything. Maggie had gone very still. Eyes wide. I see, I said. You swore you wouldn't tell, Maggie said. Everyone did. We swore we wouldn't take his deal and give him that influence. I'm keeping my word, he told her. To me, he said, when it went as poorly as it did, we were upset. The public had taken notice, and they had alerted authorities. We fulfilled the letter of the deal, but did so by offering Miss Holt the bare minimum we could. Including a lesson on how to use paper seals. Japanese name or something. Ofuda would be along the lines of what Sandra Duchamp might know, Laird said. I think that was what she offered Maggie for the murder of Molly Walker. Thank you for clarifying that detail. I reached into the little pocket and retrieved the bit of paper. With all due respect, Maggie, I'll be returning this. It was a gift, freely given, she said, not making eye contact. It's a gift with my cousin's blood on it. Maybe in it, if the goblin in here is one of the ones who participated in the attack. She didn't respond, which was answer enough. Take it, or I'm going to free it. Hospitality be damned. She hesitated, and then she seemed to realize I'd just made a statement. No maybes, no I thinks, no hedging. I was going to follow through. She took the paper. It's complicated, Maggie said. If I could have a minute to explain dash. You can have 5, I said. 10 minutes, if you need them. I'm dash. I stumbled over my words a bit. A bit of emotion, slipping through the exhaustion, and a bit of exhaustion, winning out over my body. I drew in a little breath, composed myself, then said, clearer, I'm eager to hear this. She stood there, silent, staring up at me. Okay, she said. I thought I'd say that and you'd say no, but I could think it over and say something convincing later, but I can't explain. Not on the spur of the moment. Like I said, it's complicated, there was more going on. I dash. Maggie, I interrupted her. You should be off to school. I promised I'd go, I didn't promise I'd be there the whole day. I can stay, we can talk this over, hammer it out. I don't dislike you. I meant it when I said I was entering with no ill will. No shame? I asked. No guilt? Not then, she said. Some now, that I've gotten to know you. You lied to my face, I said. I can't lie. I'm a practitioner. A lie by omission. Doesn't count, or we'd be lying every passing second. Blake, she wasn't even a person to me. They talked her up, big bad diabolist who didn't know what she was doing. I only really talked to her after I ordered the attack, saw how she wasn't doing anything except defending herself, and I realized what I'd done. I tried to call it off, but it doesn't work that way. I could remember being beaten, the people kicking me, using weapons, and the connection to what had happened to Molly made it feel doubly real. Maggie chose that moment to reach out, and I grabbed her hand, crushing it inside mine, hard enough to hurt her. I could see her reaction run through her entire body. Pain, fear. I'm sorry, she said, despite whatever else she was experiencing. That moment was when I decided I was done working with these guys. I sorta kinda wanted to be your ally, make it up to your family, somehow. I shifted my grip on her hand, so I held only the fingers. Karma, hospitality. I raised her hand to my mouth, and I kissed the knuckles. Thank you for visiting, Maggie, I said. I appreciated your company, even if I don't, right this second. I appreciate the information you shared, and the gift you offered. I want to make this better, she said, quiet. I'd really like a chance. If not now, then later. She met me in the eye, then looked down. Can I say it was 50-50-ish? That's an awful lot of wanting to make amends, when you're as power-hungry an idiot as I am? I don't think so, Maggie. That's not good enough. FFFF, she struggled. Fluffernutter. Fluffernutter, I said. Please leave now, before I do something I'll regret. Yep, she mumbled. I waited while she stepped into her boots, zipped them up, and made her way out onto the porch. You two have a good day, I said, monotone. You too, Laird said, smiling just a bit. I slammed the door.